At the heart of this tragic tale were two sisters, Jessica and Cassandra Lawrence, whose lives had been intertwined in a complex web of love, rivalry, and resentment since childhood. Cassandra, the elder of the two, had always been the golden child, beautiful, accomplished, and married to the charming and successful architect, Dominic Blunt. Their union was the envy of Millhaven, a seemingly perfect marriage that everyone aspired to emulate. Jessica and Cassandra were born into a family of moderate means, their father a local fisherman, and their mother a schoolteacher. From an early age, it was clear that the two sisters were as different as night and day. Cassandra, with her gentle demeanor, was the pride of her parents. She excelled in school, was beloved by her teachers, and seemed to navigate the social waters of Millhaven with effortless grace. Her path in life seemed predetermined. She would go to college, find a respectable job, and settle down with a good man to start a family of her own. Jessica, however, was a force of nature from the moment she could walk. She possessed a wild spirit that both intrigued and unsettled those around her. While equally intelligent as her sister, Jessica's academic achievements were overshadowed by her rebellious nature and penchant for pushing boundaries. As they grew older, the differences between the sisters only became more pronounced. Cassandra pursued a degree in education, following in her mother's footsteps, while Jessica bounced between various majors, never quite finding her place. It was during this time that Jessica's manipulative tendencies began to surface. She would charm her way out of trouble, using her wit and allure to bend situations to her advantage. Jessica's relationships were always intense but short-lived. She seemed to thrive on the chaos of new romances, only to grow bored once the initial excitement faded. This pattern left a trail of broken hearts and bitter exes in her wake, further cementing her reputation as the black sheep of Millhaven. Cassandra, meanwhile, had returned to her hometown after college and quickly caught the eye of Dominic Blunt, a rising star in the world of architecture. Dominic had come to Millhaven to oversee the restoration of the town's historic lighthouse, but found himself captivated by the town's gentle beauty, both in its landscape and in Cassandra herself. Their courtship was swift and passionate, culminating in a fairy tale wedding that was the talk of the town for months. Dominic's career continued to flourish, and soon he and Cassandra were living in a beautiful home overlooking the ocean, their life together seeming like a modern-day fairy tale. But beneath the surface of their perfect marriage, cracks were beginning to form. Cassandra, always the dutiful daughter and wife, found herself yearning for something more. She had given up her own dreams of travel and adventure to settle in Millhaven, and a part of her resented the sacrifices she had made for the sake of her marriage. Dominic, for his part, was battling his own demons. The pressure of his high-profile career and the expectations of small-town life weighed heavily on him. He loved Cassandra deeply, but there were moments when he felt suffocated by the perfection they were expected to maintain. It was into this delicate balance that Jessica re-entered their lives. Having spent years drifting from city to city, she returned to Millhaven, claiming to want to reconnect with her roots. In reality, she was running from yet another failed relationship and mounting debts, seeking refuge in the only place she knew would take her in. Cassandra, ever the loving sister, welcomed Jessica with open arms, offering her a place to stay until she got back on her feet. But as Jessica settled into life in the Blunt household, the dynamics between the three began to shift in subtle yet profound ways. The stage was set for a drama that would shake Millhaven to its very core, forever altering the lives of all involved. At first, her presence seemed to breathe new life into Cassandra and Dominic's relationship. Evenings were filled with laughter and reminiscence as the sisters caught up on lost time, with Dominic playing the role of the attentive husband and brother-in-law. But as days turned to weeks, Jessica's true intentions began to surface. Her eyes would linger on Dominic a moment too long, her casual touches becoming more frequent and deliberate. She would find excuses to be alone with him, asking for help with her car, seeking advice on job applications, or simply catching him in the kitchen late at night when Cassandra had already gone to bed. Dominic, initially oblivious to Jessica's advances, found himself increasingly drawn to her vibrant personality. Where Cassandra was steady and predictable, Jessica was spontaneous and exciting. She listened with rapt attention to his architectural designs, asking insightful questions that made him feel truly understood. In those moments, Dominic felt a spark he hadn't experienced in years. Dominic was a man of principle, devoted to his wife and the life they had built together. He tried to distance himself from Jessica, making excuses to spend more time at the office or taking on additional projects that kept him away from home. Jessica, however, was not so easily deterred. She recognized the internal struggle in Dominic's eyes and saw it as a challenge rather than a deterrent. She began to weave a careful web of seduction, playing on his insecurities and unfulfilled desires. One evening, as Cassandra attended a school board meeting, Jessica orchestrated a seemingly innocent dinner with Dominic. She prepared his favorite meal, opened a bottle of expensive wine, and created an atmosphere of intimacy that was hard to resist. As they talked late into the night, Jessica carefully steered the conversation towards Dominic's passions and dreams, areas where she knew Cassandra had never fully connected with him. Dominic felt a rush of emotions, flattery, desire, and overwhelming guilt. He stammered a response, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. But Jessica had already sensed her advantage. She leaned in closer, her hand brushing against his. Don't you ever wonder what it would be like to be truly understood? To be with someone who sees you for who you really are? The tension in the room was palpable. Dominic knew he should leave, should put an end to this dangerous game before it went too far. But something kept him rooted to the spot, caught in the gravitational pull of Jessica's allure. As Jessica's lips met his in a passionate kiss, Dominic's resistance crumbled. In that moment, the foundation of his marriage began to crack, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to unimaginable tragedy. The weeks following that fateful night were a blur of stolen moments and mounting guilt for Dominic. What had begun as a momentary lapse in judgment quickly spiraled into a full-blown affair, with Jessica and Dominic finding increasingly creative ways to be together without arousing Cassandra's suspicions. Their rendezvous ranged from hurried encounters in Dominic's office to carefully planned business trips that allowed them to escape the watchful eyes of Millhaven. Jessica reveled in the thrill of their forbidden romance, each secret meeting fueling her sense of triumph over her sister. For Dominic, the affair was an intoxicating mixture of excitement and self-loathing, each encounter leaving him both exhilarated and racked with guilt. Jessica, ever the master manipulator, knew exactly how to keep Dominic ensnared. She played the role of the perfect lover, alternating between passionate temptress and vulnerable confidant. She would listen to his frustrations about work and his unfulfilled ambitions, offering the understanding and validation he craved. "I've never met anyone like you, Dominic," she would whisper in their intimate moments. "You deserve so much more than this small town can offer you." Her words were carefully chosen, planting seeds of discontent in Dominic's mind about his life with Cassandra. She painted vivid pictures of the future they could have together, a life of excitement and passion, free from the constraints of small-town expectations. Dominic found himself increasingly torn between his growing feelings for Jessica and his loyalty to Cassandra. The double life he was leading began to take its toll, manifesting in mood swings and uncharacteristic behavior that didn't go unnoticed by his wife. At home, Dominic's guilt manifested in a mixture of emotional distance and overcompensation. There were days when he could barely look Cassandra in the eye, and others where he would shower her with affection, driven by remorse. He threw himself into his work, taking on more projects than ever before, using his career as both an escape and an excuse for his frequent absences. Jessica, for her part, played the role of the doting sister-in-law to perfection. She would engage Cassandra in long conversations, feigning interest in her day-to-day life while secretly reveling in her deception. There were moments when a flicker of guilt would cross Jessica's face, a brief recognition of the pain she was causing her sister. But these moments were quickly suppressed, overshadowed by her desire for Dominic and her deep-seated need to finally outshine Cassandra. As the affair progressed, the risks they took became greater. They began meeting in more public places, their need for each other overriding their caution. There were close calls, a neighbor who almost caught them in an embrace, a colleague of Cassandra's who saw them dining together in a neighboring town. Each near discovery only added to the intensity of their relationship, the danger becoming part of the allure. But as weeks turned to months, the strain of their deception began to show. Dominic, once energized by the affair, now found himself constantly on edge. The guilt was eating away at him, affecting his work and his relationships with friends and family. He began to question whether the passion he felt for Jessica was worth the destruction of the life he had built with Cassandra. Jessica, sensing Dominic's internal struggle, doubled down on her efforts to keep him engaged. She became more demanding of his time, more insistent in her declarations of love. Her manipulations became more overt, playing on his guilt and his desires in equal measure. As their affair reached its fever pitch, neither Jessica nor Dominic realized that their carefully constructed house of cards was about to come crashing down. The truth, as it often does, was quietly making its way to the surface, ready to shatter the lives of all involved. While Jessica and Dominic were lost in their passionate affair, Cassandra was slowly piecing together a puzzle she never wanted to solve. At first, the changes were subtle. A lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume on Dominic's clothes, hushed phone conversations that would abruptly end when she entered the room, and an emotional distance that seemed to grow with each passing day. Cassandra, ever the optimist, initially chalked these changes up to work stress or a midlife crisis. She tried to bridge the growing gap between them, planning romantic dinners and weekend getaways, only to be met with half-hearted enthusiasm from Dominic. Her sister Jessica, ironically, became her confidant during this time, offering sympathetic ears and reassurances that only served to twist the knife of betrayal deeper. But as weeks turned to months, Cassandra could no longer ignore the nagging voice in the back of her mind. She began to pay closer attention to the inconsistencies in Dominic's stories about late nights at the office and out-of-town meetings. She noticed the way Jessica's eyes would follow Dominic across a room, the barely concealed hunger in her gaze. One afternoon, while doing laundry, Cassandra found a matchbook from a hotel in a neighboring city tucked into the pocket of Dominic's jacket. A hotel she knew wasn't anywhere near his usual business haunts. The discovery sent a chill down her spine, the physical evidence making it impossible to deny her worst fears any longer. Torn between confronting her suspicions and the fear of what she might uncover, Cassandra found herself in a state of constant anxiety. She began to withdraw from friends and colleagues, unable to bear the thought of sharing her suspicions and making them real. Her sleep was plagued by nightmares, and she found herself watching Dominic and Jessica like a hawk, searching for any sign that would confirm or deny her fears. In a moment of desperation, Cassandra even considered hiring a private investigator, but the thought of strangers prying into her private life was too much to bear. Instead, she decided to confront Dominic and Jessica separately, hoping that one of them would crack under the pressure and reveal the truth. Little did Cassandra know that her decision to seek the truth would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to a confrontation more devastating than she could have ever imagined, forever altering the course of all their lives. The day of reckoning arrived on a stormy afternoon in late autumn. She had spent the morning steeling herself for this moment, rehearsing what she would say, how she would remain calm and collected in the face of potential heartbreak. When Dominic walked through the door, shaking rain from his coat, he was met with the sight of his wife standing in the room, her face a mask of barely contained emotion. The tension in the air was palpable, and he knew instantly that their carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. "We need to talk," she began, her voice quavering slightly despite her best efforts. "I know about you and Jessica." The color drained from Dominic's face, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find words. In that moment of stunned silence, Cassandra saw the truth written plainly across his features, and her last shred of hope evaporated. "How long?" she demanded, her voice rising. "How long have you been sleeping with my sister?" Dominic's shoulders slumped in defeat. He knew there was no point in denying it any longer. "Cassandra, I'm so sorry, it just happened." Cassandra cut him off with a bitter laugh. "You never meant to? What, did you trip and fall into her bed? How could you do this?" The floodgates opened, and months of pent-up suspicion and hurt came pouring out. Cassandra hurled accusations and questions at Dominic, her voice echoing through the house. Dominic, for his part, could only stand there and absorb her fury, offering weak apologies that did nothing to stem the tide of her anger. As their argument reached a fever pitch, the front door opened, and Jessica walked in, stopping short at the scene before her. For a moment, the three of them stood frozen in a tableau of betrayal and guilt. "Jessica, how kind of you to join us. We were just discussing your affair with my husband." Jessica's eyes darted between Cassandra and Dominic, her mind racing to find a way out of this situation. Dominic, torn between the two sisters, tried to intervene. "Please, let's just calm down and talk about this rationally." His words only served to redirect Cassandra's fury. In a fit of rage, Cassandra grabbed a vase from the coffee table and hurled it across the room, narrowly missing Dominic's head. It shattered against the wall, the crash punctuating her words. The noise seemed to snap Jessica out of her defiant stance. For the first time, a flicker of remorse crossed her face. Dominic and Jessica exchanged a look of helpless guilt before slowly making their way to the door. As it closed behind them, Cassandra collapsed onto the sofa, her body racked with sobs. The life she had known, the future she had planned, it had all crumbled to dust in a matter of minutes. As the storm raged outside, Cassandra's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, shame, betrayal, and an overwhelming sense of loss. In that moment, she made a decision that would set in motion the final tragic act of this sordid drama. The bartender, a grizzled man named Hank, watched with growing concern as Cassandra knocked back drink after drink. He had seen his fair share of patrons drowning their sorrows, but something about the wild look in Cassandra's eyes set him on edge. "Another," Cassandra demanded, her words slightly slurred. Hank hesitated, but the steel in her gaze made him think better of refusing. He poured her another whiskey, neat, silently vowing it would be her last. As the night wore on, the bar emptied out, leaving Cassandra alone with her thoughts and her drinks. The alcohol had dulled the sharp edges of her pain, replacing it with a bitter resolve. Around midnight, Hank gently suggested it was time for her to head home. "Need me to call you a cab, miss?" Cassandra waved him off, fumbling in her purse for her car keys. "I'm fine," she insisted. "I just need to get out of here." Hank reached out to stop her, but Cassandra was already stumbling towards the door. As she stumbled into the parking lot, Cassandra managed to get her car started, the engine roaring to life in the quiet night. She pulled out of the parking lot, her vision blurred and her reactions dangerously slow. The winding coastal road stretched out before her, a ribbon of asphalt barely visible in the moonlight. As she drove, Cassandra's mind was a chaotic whirl of emotions: anger at Dominic and Jessica's betrayal, shame at not having seen the signs earlier, fear of the uncertain future that now lay ahead of her. The speedometer crept higher as she pressed down on the accelerator. It was on a particularly treacherous curve that disaster struck. Cassandra's dulled reflexes failed her, and she took the turn too fast. She felt the car begin to slide, tires screeching against the asphalt. In a moment of terrifying clarity, she realized her mistake, but it was too late. The guardrail gave way with a sickening crunch of metal, and suddenly Cassandra was airborne. Then darkness consumed her as the car plummeted over the cliff's edge, tumbling end over end towards the jagged rocks below. The first rays of dawn were just breaking over the horizon when Officer Liam Murphy received the call. A jogger had spotted a wrecked car at the bottom of Whispering Cliffs, a notorious stretch of coastline. Murphy, a seasoned member of Millhaven's small police force, felt a sense of dread as he made his way to the scene. The sight that greeted him was grim. The car, a silver sedan, was barely recognizable, having been crushed by the impact and battered by the waves. As the rescue team worked to extract the vehicle from its precarious position, Murphy began the somber task of piecing together what had happened. The license plate, miraculously still intact, quickly identified the car as belonging to Cassandra Blunt. Murphy felt his heart sink. He knew Cassandra, as did most people in Millhaven. The thought of delivering this news to her family weighed heavily on him. As the morning progressed, and the full extent of the tragedy became clear, whispers began to circulate through the town. Cassandra Blunt, dead in what appeared to be a drunk driving accident? It seemed impossible, completely out of character for the woman everyone knew as responsible and level-headed. Detective Sarah Watson, called in from the nearest city to lead the investigation, sensed there was more to the story. Her keen eye noted details that didn't quite add up: the lack of skid marks on the road, suggesting no attempt to brake; the odd angle of the car's trajectory off the cliff; the fact that Cassandra had been drinking alone, something her friends swore she never did. When Watson arrived at the Blunt residence to break the news, she was struck by the palpable tension in the air. Dominic Blunt's reaction to his wife's death seemed oddly muted, tinged with guilt, and the presence of Jessica Lawrence, Cassandra's sister, in the house at such an early hour raised immediate red flags. In the days that followed Cassandra's death, Detective Watson immersed herself in the investigation, peeling back layers of Millhaven's seemingly idyllic surface to reveal the turmoil beneath. Her first step was to retrace Cassandra's final hours, a task that led her to the Rusty Anchor and its reluctant bartender, Hank. Hank's account of Cassandra's state on the night of her death painted a picture of a woman in deep emotional distress, She was knocking them back like there was no tomorrow, he told Watson. Guilt etched on his weathered face, I tried to stop her from driving. This testimony conflicted sharply with everything Watson had heard about Cassandra from friends and colleagues. The woman they described was cautious, responsible, not someone who would drink to excess and then get behind the wheel. The detective's suspicions deepened. Watson's next focus was on Dominic Blunt and Jessica Lawrence. Their behavior since Cassandra's death had been odd, to say the least. Instead of grieving separately, they seemed to be leaning on each other for support, their interactions marked by meaningful glances and hushed conversations that would abruptly cease when others approached. A breakthrough came when Watson interviewed Cassandra's closest friend, Olivia Chen. At first, Olivia was reluctant to speak ill of the dead or cause more pain to the family, but as Watson gently pressed, the floodgates opened. Cassandra had confided in me just days before it happened, Olivia admitted, her voice quavering. She suspected Dominic was having an affair with Jessica. This revelation cast the entire case in a new light. Watson immediately sought to corroborate this information, digging deeper into Dominic and Jessica's recent activities. Bank records showed suspicious transactions, hotel bookings, expensive gifts that aligned with times Dominic had claimed to be on business trips. As the evidence mounted, Watson brought Dominic and Jessica in for separate interviews. Under the detectives' relentless questioning, their carefully constructed alibis began to crumble. It was Jessica who broke first. Yes, we were having an affair, she confessed, tears streaming down her face. Cassandra found out that night. We had a huge fight, all three of us. But I swear, we didn't know she'd left the house after we went. Dominic, confronted with Jessica's confession, finally admitted to the affair but vehemently denied any involvement in Cassandra's death. We made a terrible mistake, he said, his voice hollow with regret. But I loved Cassandra. I would never have wanted this. Watson believed they were telling the truth about not directly causing Cassandra's death, but she knew their actions had set the tragic events in motion. The detective's report painted a clear picture. Cassandra, distraught after discovering her husband's infidelity with her own sister, had sought solace in alcohol. Her decision to drive in that state, while ultimately her own, was the direct result of the emotional trauma inflicted by Dominic and Jessica's betrayal. In the end, no criminal charges were filed in relation to Cassandra's death, but in the court of public opinion, Dominic and Jessica were already condemned. The truth of their affair spread through Millhaven like wildfire, forever tarnishing their reputations and ensuring that Cassandra's death would haunt them for the rest of their lives. As time passed, the raw pain of the events began to dull, but their impact on Millhaven remained. The town would eventually regain its outward appearance of tranquility, but its inhabitants carried with them the knowledge that beneath the calm surface of small-town life, passions and secrets could swirl with deadly force. The tragedy of Cassandra Blunt had forever changed the soul of Millhaven, leaving an indelible mark on all who called it home. Sabrina Brooks was known for her beauty and charm, qualities that had once captivated her husband, Robert. Their marriage seemed like a fairy tale, a perfect match that everyone admired. But the arrival of Robert's elderly mother, Miriam, into their home set off a chain of events that would end in unspeakable horror. Miriam was a frail but spirited woman, loved by her son and cherished by those who knew her. When Robert decided to bring her to live with them, he believed it was the right thing to do, a way to care for her in her twilight years. Sabrina, however, saw it differently. She viewed Miriam as an intruder, a threat to her domestic bliss. As tensions escalated, Sabrina's resentment turned to desperation. In a moment of madness, she concocted a deadly plan to rid herself of the woman she blamed for her misery. What followed was a chilling tale of premeditated murder, a crime that would leave an indelible mark on all who were touched by it. Sabrina and Robert's relationship began like a whirlwind romance. They met at a friend's wedding, where Robert, a successful architect, was immediately smitten by Sabrina's grace and vivacity. She worked as a freelance product photographer, and her creative spirit matched well with Robert's structured approach to life. After a brief courtship, they married and settled into a beautiful home on the outskirts of town. Miriam Brooks had lived a full life. Widowed for nearly a decade, she maintained her independence in a modest house in town. Her health had begun to decline, and Robert, ever the dutiful son, felt it was his responsibility to care for her. Miriam had always been a nurturing presence in Robert's life, and he couldn't bear the thought of her being alone. Initially, Sabrina and Miriam got along well enough. Miriam was polite and grateful, and Sabrina, though slightly apprehensive, made an effort to welcome her mother-in-law. But as weeks turned into months, the strain of their living arrangement began to show. Miriam's constant presence disrupted the couple's privacy and routine, and Sabrina felt increasingly sidelined in her own home. Robert, caught between his wife and his mother, tried to balance their needs. He was patient and kind, hoping that time would ease the tension, but Sabrina's discontent only grew. She confided in her friends about the stress she was under, seeking advice on how to cope. Some suggested patience, while others hinted that Robert's loyalty to his mother might always overshadow his marriage. The situation worsened as Miriam's health declined further. She required more care and attention, which fell primarily on Sabrina during the day while Robert was at work. The constant demands wore on her, leading to frequent arguments with Robert. He, in turn, became defensive and frustrated, unable to understand why Sabrina couldn't be more accommodating. Sabrina's resentment festered, turning into a simmering rage. She felt trapped, her life overshadowed by an elderly woman who seemed to sap all the joy from her marriage. As her desperation grew, Sabrina's thoughts took a darker turn. She began to entertain the idea of a life without Miriam, envisioning the return of her once idyllic marriage. It was in these moments of bitterness and despair that the seeds of her deadly plan were sown. Robert's decision to bring Miriam into their home was not made lightly. He had seen his mother's health decline and knew she needed more support than he could provide from a distance. After long discussions with Sabrina, he convinced her that it was the best solution. Reluctantly, Sabrina agreed, though she harbored reservations about the impact on their marriage. The day Miriam moved in, Robert and Sabrina prepared a guest room with care. Robert was excited to have his mother close, and Sabrina, though uneasy, wanted to support her husband's decision. Miriam arrived with a few suitcases and a warm smile, grateful for her son's hospitality. In the beginning, the arrangement seemed manageable. Miriam was polite and tried not to impose. She kept to her room most of the time, reading or knitting, and joined the couple for meals and occasional outings. Robert was relieved to see his mother settled and safe, but Sabrina began to feel the strain almost immediately. Miriam's presence altered the dynamics of the household. Dinner conversations that once flowed easily between Sabrina and Robert now included Miriam's comments and stories. Robert's attention was divided, and Sabrina found herself missing the intimacy they once shared. The subtle shifts in their relationship gnawed at her, creating an undercurrent of resentment. The first major conflict arose over household routines. Miriam, accustomed to her way of doing things, often interfered with Sabrina's established methods. She would rearrange the kitchen, critique Sabrina's cooking, or offer unsolicited advice on housekeeping. Sabrina, who prided herself on running an efficient home, felt undermined and disrespected. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner where Miriam had criticized Sabrina's choice of dessert, the couple had a heated argument. Robert, exhausted from work and the constant tension, defended his mother, insisting that Sabrina was overreacting. Sabrina, feeling betrayed and isolated, lashed out, accusing Robert of always taking his mother's side. The arguments became more frequent. Robert, torn between his love for his wife and his duty to his mother, struggled to keep the peace. He tried to mediate, suggesting compromises and asking both women to be more understanding. But the underlying issues remained unresolved, and the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly toxic. Sabrina's resentment deepened as she felt increasingly trapped in a situation she had never wanted. Her friends noticed the change in her demeanor, and she confided in a few about the constant stress she was under. Some offered sympathy, others advised her to stand her ground, but none could offer a solution that seemed viable. As the days turned into weeks, the initial harmony gave way to a persistent tension that permeated every aspect of their lives. The once warm and inviting home became a battleground of unspoken grievances and simmering anger. Sabrina's frustration reached a boiling point, and she began to fantasize about drastic measures to reclaim her life. Little did she know, those dark thoughts would soon manifest into a chilling reality. The tension in the Brooks household continued to rise, seeping into every corner of their lives. Miriam, oblivious to the depth of Sabrina's resentment, tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. She believed that with time things would improve, but Sabrina's patience was wearing thin, and her anger became harder to conceal. One morning, Sabrina discovered that Miriam had reorganized the pantry. What seemed like a minor inconvenience to Robert felt like a personal affront to Sabrina. She stormed into the living room where Miriam was sitting, her voice shaking with barely contained fury. "You can't just come in here and change everything. This is my house." Miriam looked up, startled. "I was only trying to help, dear. I didn't mean to upset you. It's not help when it's done without asking. You're just making things harder." Robert walked in just as Sabrina's voice rose, and he quickly stepped between them. "Sabrina, please calm down. She's just trying to help." Sabrina shot him a look of pure frustration. "You always take her side, Robert. I'm the one who has to deal with this every day." Robert sighed, rubbing his temples. "This isn't about sides. We're a family. We need to work together." Despite Robert's attempts to mediate, the rift between Sabrina and Miriam grew wider. Sabrina started avoiding Miriam as much as possible, retreating to her studio to work on her graphic design projects. She found solace in her work, a temporary escape from the constant strain at home. But the escape was fleeting. Every time she left her studio, she was reminded of Miriam's presence. The small irritations accumulated, each one adding to the weight of her resentment. She began to dread coming home, the once safe haven now a source of continuous stress. Friends noticed the change in Sabrina. She became more withdrawn, her usual vibrant personality overshadowed by a constant undercurrent of tension. During a coffee outing with her close friend Julia, Sabrina finally opened up about the depth of her frustration. "I don't know how much more of this I can take, Julia. She's everywhere all the time. It's like I'm living with a stranger in my own home." Julia listened sympathetically. "Have you talked to Robert about how you feel?" Sabrina let out a bitter laugh. "Talked? All we do is argue about her. He doesn't see how much it's affecting me. He just wants to keep the peace." Julia reached out and squeezed Sabrina's hand. "Maybe you need to take some time for yourself. Get away for a bit. Clear your head." Sabrina nodded, but deep down she knew that a temporary escape wouldn't solve her problems. The constant presence of Miriam in her home felt like a prison sentence, one she couldn't escape from. Her thoughts grew darker, and she began to entertain ideas she had once considered unthinkable. One night, as Sabrina lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a thought crossed her mind that made her shudder. What if Miriam wasn't here anymore? The idea lingered, gaining strength with each passing day. It was a forbidden thought, one that brought a sense of both horror and twisted relief. As the days turned into weeks, the seeds of a plan began to take root in Sabrina's mind. She started researching methods to make someone ill, initially out of morbid curiosity. But the more she read, the more the idea of poisoning Miriam seemed like a viable solution to her predicament. It would be quick, discreet, and if done correctly, could appear as a natural death. Sabrina's desperation clouded her judgment. She convinced herself that this was the only way to regain control of her life and salvage her marriage. The dark thoughts that had once seemed so alien now felt like a lifeline. Little did she know this decision would lead her down a path of no return, with consequences far beyond her darkest imaginings. Sabrina's desperation reached its peak as she found herself more isolated and overwhelmed by the day. The once loving and harmonious relationship with Robert now felt like a distant memory, replaced by constant arguments and mutual resentment. She began to see Miriam not as an innocent elderly woman, but as the embodiment of all her marital problems. Confiding in friends became a regular outlet for Sabrina's frustration. During a particularly emotional conversation with her friend Lisa, Sabrina's true feelings came to the surface. "I can't do this anymore, Lisa. Every day is a battle. I feel like I'm losing myself." Lisa looked concerned. "You need to find a way to cope, Sabrina. Maybe you should see a therapist or take some time away." Sabrina shook her head. "Therapy won't change anything. The problem is Miriam. As long as she's here, nothing will get better." Lisa hesitated, then spoke softly. "Have you thought about asking her to move out? Maybe she could go to a care facility where she'd get the help she needs." Sabrina's eyes darkened. "Robert would never agree to that. He's too loyal. He'd see it as abandoning her." Lisa sighed. "I'm worried about you, Sabrina. This isn't healthy. You need to do something before it's too late." Sabrina nodded absently, but her mind was already elsewhere. She had considered every possible solution and always came back to the same conclusion. Miriam had to go. The idea of poisoning her mother-in-law, once a fleeting thought, now seemed like the only viable option. Sabrina began to meticulously plan Miriam's demise. She spent hours researching poisons, focusing on substances that would be difficult to detect. Her background in graphic design gave her an eye for detail, and she applied this skill to her dark new project. She discovered that certain plants, when ingested in small doses over time, could cause symptoms resembling a natural illness. With a plan in place, Sabrina started the next phase, obtaining the poison. She chose aconite, a potent toxin found in monkshood plants. It was a risky choice, but one that could be easily masked in food. She ordered the seeds online, ensuring they were delivered to a friend's address to avoid suspicion. The seeds arrived a few days later, and Sabrina carefully cultivated them in a hidden corner of her garden. She tended to them with a mixture of dread and determination, knowing that each day brought her closer to executing her plan. The process took weeks, during which the tension in the house continued to escalate. Miriam's health, already fragile, began to show signs of further decline. She frequently complained of stomach pains and nausea, symptoms that Sabrina dismissed with a feigned concern. Robert, ever the devoted son, grew increasingly worried, suggesting doctor visits and tests to determine the cause. Sabrina played her part well, expressing appropriate levels of worry and support. She accompanied Miriam to the doctor, reassuring Robert that they were doing everything possible. The doctors attributed Miriam's symptoms to her age and existing health conditions, prescribing medications that did little to alleviate her suffering. The final stage of Sabrina's plan required careful timing. She waited for a day when Robert would be away for an extended period, ensuring she had the house to herself. She prepared a special meal for Miriam, infusing it with a small amount of aconite. The dose was low enough to avoid immediate suspicion, but high enough to exacerbate Miriam's symptoms. As Miriam ate the meal, Sabrina watched her with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. She felt a twisted sense of relief, believing that she was finally taking control of her life. But the act also brought a deep sense of guilt, one that gnawed at her even as she reassured herself that this was the only way. In the days that followed, Miriam's condition worsened. She grew weaker and more lethargic, her complaints of pain more frequent. Robert was beside himself with worry, while Sabrina maintained her facade of concern. The poison was doing its job, slowly but surely, and Sabrina felt both triumphant and terrified at the prospect of what she had set in motion. Sabrina's meticulous planning reached its final stages as she prepared to carry out the poisoning. The growing tension and escalating arguments with Robert only fueled her resolve. She was convinced that eliminating Miriam was the only way to restore harmony to her marriage and reclaim her life. Acquiring the aconite seeds had been a nerve-wracking process. Sabrina knew the risks involved in handling such a potent toxin, but desperation had clouded her judgment. She carefully cultivated the plants, watching them grow with a mix of dread and determination. Each step brought her closer to the point of no return. Sabrina spent hours in her studio, not working on her usual graphic design projects, but refining her plan. She researched the effects of aconite, ensuring she understood the symptoms it would produce. Vomiting, diarrhea, and abdominal pain were common, symptoms that could easily be mistaken for a severe but natural illness in an elderly woman like Miriam. Timing was crucial. Sabrina needed to administer the poison in such a way that it would slowly deteriorate Miriam's health, making her death appear as a natural progression of her existing ailments. She decided to mix small amounts of the aconite into Miriam's food over several weeks, gradually increasing the dosage. Sabrina's first attempt was a simple broth. She chose a day when Robert was working late, giving her the time and privacy she needed. Miriam, unaware of the sinister intent behind the meal, ate the broth without suspicion. Sabrina watched her carefully, noting any signs of discomfort. In the days that followed, Miriam began to complain more frequently of stomach pains and nausea. Sabrina played the concerned daughter-in-law, offering comfort and suggesting they visit the doctor. Robert, seeing Sabrina's apparent dedication, was grateful and less inclined to suspect any foul play. Sabrina continued to administer the poison, each dose carefully calculated to avoid immediate detection. She alternated the methods of delivery, sometimes mixing it into tea, other times blending it into soups or casseroles. Each meal brought Miriam closer to the brink, her health steadily declining. Despite her outward calm, Sabrina was racked with guilt and fear. The enormity of her actions weighed heavily on her, but she convinced herself that this was the only solution. She reminded herself of the life she would regain once Miriam was gone, a life free from the constant strain and arguments. Robert's increasing concern for his mother's health provided Sabrina with the perfect cover. He arranged for multiple doctor visits, each one yielding no definitive answers. The medical professionals attributed Miriam's symptoms to her age and existing conditions, prescribing medications that did little to help. Sabrina's plan seemed to be working flawlessly. Miriam's decline was gradual, and the doctors saw no reason to suspect foul play. Sabrina's meticulous research and careful administration of the poison ensured that Miriam's symptoms matched those of a natural illness. The final dose was administered on a particularly stressful day. Robert had left for an extended business trip, leaving Sabrina and Miriam alone in the house. It was the perfect opportunity to deliver the fatal dose of aconite without immediate suspicion. The house felt unnaturally quiet, a silence that seemed to echo Sabrina's racing thoughts. Sabrina prepared Miriam's favorite soup, a creamy mushroom bisque. She measured the aconite carefully, her hand steady despite the turmoil inside her. This was it. There was no turning back. The poison, now finely ground and nearly invisible, was mixed into the soup with methodical precision. As she carried the bowl to the dining table, Sabrina forced a smile. "Lunch is ready, Miriam. I made your favorite." Miriam, looking frailer than ever, managed a weak smile. "Thank you, dear. You're so kind." Sabrina felt a pang of guilt but quickly suppressed it. She watched as Miriam slowly ate the soup, each spoonful bringing her closer to the end. The meal progressed in a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of Miriam's labored breathing. As the poison took effect, Miriam's discomfort became evident. She clutched her stomach, her face contorted in pain. Sabrina maintained her facade of concern, suggesting they call a doctor. But the symptoms progressed rapidly, and soon Miriam was struggling to breathe. Sabrina dialed 911, her voice filled with feigned panic. "My mother-in-law is very ill. Please send an ambulance quickly." The paramedics arrived within minutes, finding Miriam in severe distress. They rushed her to the hospital, with Sabrina following closely behind. In the sterile confines of the emergency room, Sabrina watched as the doctors and nurses worked frantically to save Miriam. She maintained her act, shedding tears and expressing worry, but inside she felt a grim sense of relief. Despite their efforts, Miriam's condition deteriorated rapidly. The poison had done its job, and within hours Miriam passed away. The official cause of death was listed as complications from her existing health issues, exacerbated by her age. The doctors saw no reason to suspect foul play, and Sabrina's plan seemed to have succeeded perfectly. Robert was devastated when he received the news. He returned home immediately, shattered by the loss of his mother. Sabrina played the supportive wife, comforting him through his grief while hiding the dark truth. The funeral was a somber affair, with friends and family gathering to pay their respects. Sabrina's performance was flawless, her sorrow appearing genuine to all who observed, but the guilt gnawed at her. Each time Robert spoke of his mother's kindness and strength, Sabrina felt a stab of remorse. She had taken an innocent life, driven by desperation and resentment. The relief she had expected was overshadowed by the weight of her actions. She had crossed a line and there was no going back. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Robert threw himself into his work, using it as a distraction from his grief. Sabrina, meanwhile, tried to resume her usual routines, but the shadow of her crime loomed large. She found it difficult to concentrate on her graphic design projects, her mind constantly replaying the events of that fateful day. Her friends noticed the change in her demeanor, but Sabrina attributed it to the stress of Miriam's death and the strain on her marriage. She continued to put on a brave face, maintaining the facade of a grieving daughter-in-law, but inside she was falling apart. One night, as she lay in bed beside Robert, the enormity of her actions hit her with full force. She had committed murder, taken a life to solve her problems, and now she had to live with the consequences. The thought was overwhelming, and Sabrina found herself trembling with a mix of fear and regret. Robert, sensing her distress, reached out to comfort her. But deep down, she knew that the truth could not remain hidden forever. The seeds of her crime were planted, and it was only a matter of time before they bore fruit. Sabrina's carefully constructed world was built on a foundation of lies, and as the days passed, she began to realize that the price of her actions would be far greater than she had ever imagined. In the aftermath of Miriam's death, life in the Brooks household settled into a somber routine. Robert's grief was palpable, and Sabrina did her best to support him, all the while masking her own turmoil. She believed she had successfully concealed her crime, but the peace she longed for remained elusive. Little did she know, the real consequences of her actions were about to unfold. The initial investigation into Miriam's death was routine. The doctors attributed her passing to natural causes, given her age and existing health conditions. However, a nurse who had been present during Miriam's final hours noticed something odd. The rapid progression of her symptoms seemed unusual, even for someone of her age. The nurse, Emma Collins, mentioned her concerns to the attending physician, Dr. Alan Harris. Emma was experienced and meticulous, not one to jump to conclusions. Dr. Harris, although initially dismissive, agreed to review Miriam's case notes. Upon closer inspection, he too found the rapid deterioration puzzling. They decided to conduct a more thorough autopsy, just to be sure. The autopsy revealed traces of a toxin in Miriam's system, something that should not have been there. Dr. Harris immediately alerted the authorities, and the case was escalated to the Greenwood Police Department. Detective Laura Rogan was assigned to lead the investigation. Detective Rogan was a seasoned investigator with a keen eye for detail. She began by interviewing the medical staff who had attended to Miriam, gathering information about her symptoms and the timeline of her decline. The discovery of the toxin raised alarm bells, and Rogan knew this was no ordinary case. Next, Rogan turned her attention to the Brooks household. She interviewed Robert first, who was devastated by the news of a potential foul play. His genuine shock and grief were evident, and Rogan quickly ruled him out as a suspect. Sabrina, however, presented a more complex picture. Sabrina was composed during the interview, expressing appropriate levels of sadness and concern. But Rogan sensed something was off. There was a guardedness in Sabrina's demeanor, a subtle tension that didn't sit right. Rogan had seen it before, the signs of someone hiding something. Sabrina, when questioned about Miriam's health, reiterated the doctor's findings. She played the role of the caring daughter-in-law, describing how she had tried to make Miriam comfortable and had taken her to the doctor multiple times. But her story seemed rehearsed, and Rogan made a mental note to dig deeper. The detectives decided to search the Brooks house, focusing on areas where they might find evidence of poison. Sabrina grew increasingly anxious as they combed through the kitchen, the garden, and her studio. She tried to maintain her composure, but the stress was evident in her trembling hands and forced calm. In the garden, the detectives found a small patch of monkshood plants, the source of aconite. Rogan's suspicions grew. She sent samples to the lab for analysis, and the results confirmed the presence of aconite, the same toxin found in Miriam's system. The breakthrough came when the detectives discovered Sabrina's internet search history. Her computer revealed extensive research on poisons, specifically aconite, and methods of administering it. The evidence was damning, painting a clear picture of premeditated murder. Rogan confronted Sabrina with the findings. In the face of irrefutable evidence, Sabrina broke down. The facade crumbled, and she confessed to the crime, her voice filled with a mixture of guilt and desperation. She explained how the strain of living with Miriam had driven her to commit the unthinkable, believing it was the only way to save her marriage. The confession shocked Robert to his core. The woman he loved, the woman he thought he knew, had murdered his mother. His world shattered, and he struggled to comprehend the depth of Sabrina's betrayal. The couple's friends and family were equally stunned, unable to reconcile the image of the charming, creative Sabrina with that of a cold-blooded killer. Sabrina's arrest sent shockwaves through the community. The trial was set to begin 3 months after Sabrina's arrest. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Reed, presented a compelling case built on the extensive evidence gathered by Detective Rogan and her team. The jury deliberated for several days, weighing the evidence and testimonies presented. The community held its breath, waiting for the verdict. When the jury finally returned, the atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. The foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty of second-degree murder. Sabrina was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The sentence reflected the severity of her crime, while also acknowledging the mitigating circumstances presented by the defense. For Robert, the verdict brought a bittersweet sense of closure. Justice had been served, but the scars left by Sabrina's actions would never fully heal. The trial's conclusion marked the end of a tragic chapter for the Brooks family. Robert, now faced with the task of rebuilding his life, decided to leave Greenwood. The town, once a place of happy memories, had become a constant reminder of his loss. He moved to a different city, seeking a fresh start and hoping to find some semblance of peace. In the end, the Brooks family saga served as a stark reminder of the destructive power of desperation and the importance of compassion, understanding, and mental health support. It was a story that underscored the fragile nature of human relationships and the devastating consequences that could arise when those bonds were pushed to their breaking point. On a sweltering July afternoon in 2019, the facade of suburban bliss was shattered in a way that would haunt the community for years to come. At the center of this tragedy were the Hendersons. Thaddeus, a 45-year-old investment banker with a reputation for his work ethic and community involvement, and his wife Margot, a 43-year-old part-time yoga instructor known for her vibrant personality and infectious laugh. They had been fixtures in the community for over a decade, their seemingly perfect marriage the envy of many. Next door lived the Coopers, Elaine, a widow, and her 19-year-old son Liam, a college sophomore home for the summer. The Coopers had moved in 5 years ago, and while they kept to themselves more than most, they were generally well liked by their neighbors. No one could have predicted that these ordinary lives would collide in such a catastrophic way. Thaddeus Henderson had always been driven by ambition. Born to working-class parents in rural Iowa, he had clawed his way up the social ladder through sheer determination and an almost obsessive work ethic. By his early 30s, he had established himself as a rising star at a financial company. His colleagues admired his sharp analytical mind, and his clients appreciated his no-nonsense approach to wealth management. Margot Sinclair, as she was known before her marriage, had a different trajectory. The daughter of a college professor and an artist, she grew up in a household that valued creativity and self-expression. She studied modern dance at the university, dreaming of a career on stage. However, a knee injury in her senior year derailed those plans, leading her to pivot towards yoga and wellness coaching. Their paths crossed at a charity gala in 2003. Thaddeus, already successful but lacking in social graces, was immediately drawn to Margot's vivacity and charm. For Margot, Thaddeus represented stability and the promise of a comfortable life that would allow her to pursue her passions without financial worry. They married a year later in a lavish ceremony that was the talk of their social circle. The early years of their marriage were happy ones. Thaddeus's career continued to flourish, and he took pride in providing Margot with the life he felt she deserved. Margot, for her part, threw herself into being the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties and attending social events that were crucial for Thaddeus's networking. She also began teaching yoga part-time at an upscale studio, finding fulfillment in helping others achieve balance and inner peace. But as the years wore on, cracks began to appear in their carefully constructed life. Thaddeus's work hours grew longer, his ambition pushing him to chase ever bigger deals and clients. He was rarely home before 9 p.m., and even when he was physically present, his mind was often elsewhere, constantly checking his phone for emails or market updates. Margot, approaching her 40s, found herself increasingly restless. The yoga classes and charity committees that once filled her days now felt hollow. She began to question the choices that had led her to this point, wondering if she had traded her dreams for a gilded cage. The couple's failure to conceive, despite years of trying, added another layer of strain to their relationship. By the summer of 2019, the Hendersons' marriage was a carefully maintained facade. To the outside world, they still appeared to be the golden couple. Thaddeus continued to excel at work, recently closing a deal that put him in line for a partnership. Margot's yoga classes were more popular than ever, her students drawn to her warmth and apparent serenity. But behind closed doors they were virtual strangers. Conversations, when they happened, were perfunctory and centered around schedules and social obligations. Physical intimacy had become a rare occurrence, each touch laden with unspoken resentments and unfulfilled expectations. Neither Thaddeus nor Margot was willing to admit, even to themselves, how far they had drifted apart. It was easier to maintain the illusion, to go through the motions of a happy marriage, than to confront the emptiness that had grown between them. Little did they know that this unacknowledged chasm in their relationship was about to become the catalyst for a tragedy that would shatter not just their lives, but the entire community of Riverside. The Coopers had moved into the house next door to the Hendersons in 2014, following the death of Elaine Cooper's husband, Dr. Reginald Cooper, a respected oncologist. Reginald had succumbed to the very disease he had spent his life fighting, leaving Elaine to raise their son Liam alone. Elaine, a soft-spoken librarian, had initially struggled to adjust to life in the new community. The move from their modest home in St. Paul had been necessary to escape the memories that haunted every corner of their old house. But the affluent suburb felt alien to her. She found solace in her books and in tending to the garden that soon became the envy of the neighborhood. Liam Cooper was 14 when they moved in, a lanky, introverted teenager more comfortable with computers than with people. The transition to a new school had been difficult, and he often found himself the target of bullies who mocked his second-hand clothes and quiet demeanor. It was during this time that Thaddeus Henderson had taken Liam under his wing, offering him a job mowing lawns and doing odd jobs around the neighborhood. Over the next 5 years, Liam had blossomed. The awkward teen grew into a handsome young man, his natural intelligence finally finding an outlet in his computer science studies at the university. Despite his growing confidence, Liam remained devoted to his mother. He worried about her isolation and loneliness, and made a point of coming home most weekends, even when his friends were planning parties or road trips. It was on one of these weekend visits in early June that he first encountered Margot Henderson in a new light. Elaine had always been grateful for the Hendersons' kindness, particularly Margot's efforts to include her in neighborhood activities. She often spoke of Margot's generosity, unaware of the complex emotions brewing beneath the surface of her son's polite nods. The spark that ignited the affair between Margot Henderson and Liam Cooper was as unexpected as it was intense. It happened on a balmy evening in early June, during one of the Hendersons' legendary summer barbecues. Thaddeus, as usual, was holding court near the grill, regaling his colleagues with tales of his latest financial coup. Margot, feeling particularly isolated amidst the crowd, had retreated to the relative quiet of the pool house to replenish the ice bucket. Liam, who had been reluctantly dragged to the party by his mother, chose that moment to seek refuge from the noise and forced socializing. He entered the pool house not realizing it was occupied and found Margot struggling with a large bag of ice. Their eyes met, and in that instant, something shifted. He moved to help her with the ice, their hands brushing. They stood there, momentarily frozen, the cold of the ice contrasting sharply with the heat building between them. It was Margot who broke the silence, her voice husky as she thanked him. Liam, usually so articulate, found himself stammering in response. That brief encounter set the stage for what was to come. Over the next few weeks, Margot and Liam found themselves manufacturing reasons to be in each other's company. It started innocently enough, Margot asking Liam for help with her laptop, Liam offering to help in her garden. Each interaction was charged with an undercurrent of attraction that they both tried to ignore. Their first kiss happened almost a month after the barbecue. Liam had been helping Margot set up for one of her yoga classes in the park. As they finished, a sudden summer storm broke out. They ran for shelter under a nearby gazebo, laughing and breathless. As the rain poured down around them, Margot looked at Liam and felt a surge of desire she hadn't experienced in years. Before she could think better of it, she leaned in and kissed him. From that point, their affair escalated quickly. They were reckless, driven by a combination of Liam's youthful passion and Margot's desperation to feel alive again. They met in secluded spots around town, in the back row of the local cinema, in a hidden corner of the public library, and, most dangerously, in the Henderson home when Thaddeus was at work. Each encounter left them craving more, the gulf in their ages forgotten in the heat of their stolen moments. Margot felt rejuvenated, rediscovering parts of herself she thought long lost. Liam, for his part, was intoxicated by Margot's experience and the taboo nature of their relationship. But as the summer wore on, the strain of maintaining their secret began to show. Close calls became more frequent, a neighbor almost catching them in an embrace, a suspicious glance from Elaine when Margot's name came up too often in conversation. The guilt, too, started to weigh on them both. Liam struggled with the knowledge that he was betraying Thaddeus, a man who had been nothing but kind to him. Margot found herself lying more and more to her husband, each deception another crack in the foundation of her marriage. Yet despite the risks and the guilt, neither seemed able to end the affair. They were caught in a whirlwind of passion and need, blind to the devastating consequences that loomed on the horizon. July 15, 2019, dawned hot and humid. the air heavy with the promise of an approaching storm. It was a Monday, and Riverside stirred to life as its residents prepared for another week of work and routine. For Thaddeus Henderson, it began like any other day. He rose early, donned one of his impeccably tailored suits, and left for the office before Margot had even stirred from sleep. Margot woke later, her mind already racing with plans for the day ahead. Thaddeus had informed her the night before that he would be working late, a crucial client dinner that could seal his partnership deal. For Margot, this meant an opportunity. She sent a text to Liam, her heart racing as she suggested he come over in the afternoon. Liam, who had been agonizing over the affair for days, saw the message as a chance to end things face to face. He replied with a simple, "Okay," resolving to break it off before the situation spiraled further out of control. The day passed slowly for both of them. Margot went through the motions of her morning yoga class, her usual serenity replaced by a nervous energy that her students couldn't help but notice. Liam, at his summer job, found it hard to focus on the lines of code on his screen, his mind constantly drifting to thoughts of Margot and the conversation to come. At 2:30 p.m., Liam made his way next door, glancing furtively around to ensure none of the neighbors were watching. Margot ushered him in quickly, her face flushed with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. It was Liam who broke the silence, starting to say that they needed to talk. But Margot, misreading his intention and driven by a desperate need to feel desired, cut him off with a passionate kiss. Despite his reservations, Liam found himself responding, his resolve weakening in the face of Margot's intensity. What happened next was a blur of discarded clothes and tangled limbs. As they made their way to the master bedroom, all thoughts of ending the affair were temporarily forgotten as they lost themselves in each other. Meanwhile, across town, Thaddeus Henderson sat in his office frowning at his computer screen. The numbers for the client presentation weren't adding up, and he knew he'd have to redo a significant portion of his work. Frustration mounting, he made a snap decision. He would go home, regroup, and return to the office later to finish up before the dinner. At 3:45 p.m., Thaddeus's car pulled into the driveway. He noticed Liam Cooper's beat-up Honda parked a little way down the street, but thought nothing of it. Probably helping Elaine with some errand, he mused as he unlocked the front door. The house was quiet as Thaddeus entered, but something felt off. A half-empty glass of wine sat on the coffee table, unusual for Margot at this hour. Then he heard it, a muffled sound coming from upstairs. Frowning, he climbed the stairs, the noise growing louder as he approached the master bedroom. What Thaddeus saw when he opened the door would be forever seared into his memory. His wife, the woman he had loved for 15 years, was in their bed with Liam Cooper, the 19-year-old guy he had mentored and trusted. Then, with a roar of rage and pain, Thaddeus lunged forward, his hands, so used to manipulating numbers and shaking on business deals, now curled into fists as he grabbed Liam, yanking him off the bed. Margot screamed, scrambling to cover herself and separate the two men, but her efforts were in vain. Thaddeus's first punch caught Liam squarely in the jaw, sending the younger man stumbling backward. For Liam, driven by adrenaline and fear, fought back. The two men grappled, crashing into the dresser, sending framed photos and trinkets scattering across the floor. In the chaos, no one noticed the heavy crystal bookend that fell from the dresser's top. No one saw it until Thaddeus, in a fit of blind rage, grabbed it and brought it down on Liam's head with a sickening thud. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence that followed. Liam crumpled to the floor, blood pooling rapidly around his motionless form. Margot's scream pierced the air as the full horror of what had just transpired hit them all. In that moment, as storm clouds gathered outside and sirens wailed in the distance, the lives of everyone involved changed irrevocably. The idyllic facade of Riverside had been shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. The piercing wail of police sirens shattered the usual tranquility of the community. Neighbors peered out from behind curtains, curiosity mingling with apprehension, as squad cars and an ambulance screeched to a halt in front of the Henderson residence. The first officers on the scene were met with a tableau of horror that would haunt them for years to come. Inside, they found a shell-shocked Thaddeus Henderson, his hands covered in blood, sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. Margot barely clothed and hysterical. The room bore all the hallmarks of a violent struggle: overturned furniture, shattered glass, and smears of blood on the hardwood floor. Detective Ava Rossi, a veteran of the police department's homicide unit, took charge of the scene. Her first priority was securing medical attention for Liam Cooper. As paramedics worked feverishly to stabilize him, Rossi began the delicate process of piecing together the events that had led to this tragedy. Thaddeus, still in a state of shock, was taken into custody without resistance. Margot was separately questioned. Their stories, fragmented and emotional, painted a picture of a long-simmering marital discord that had exploded into violence. As word spread through the neighborhood, a crowd began to gather at the police cordon. Among them was Elaine Cooper, who collapsed in grief when informed of her son's critical condition. She was quickly whisked away to the hospital, where Liam was fighting for his life in the intensive care unit. The investigation moved quickly. Forensics teams combed through the Henderson home, collecting evidence and taking photographs. The crystal bookend, now a potential murder weapon, was carefully bagged and tagged. Neighbors were interviewed, their statements adding context to the relationships between the Hendersons and the Coopers. One neighbor recalled hearing raised voices from the Henderson house earlier that afternoon, but had dismissed it as a television playing too loudly. Another mentioned seeing Liam enter the Henderson home around 2:30 p.m., noting it because he thought it odd given Thaddeus's usual work schedule. As night fell, the gravity of the situation became clear. Liam Cooper was pronounced dead at 9:47 p.m., never having regained consciousness. The charge against Thaddeus Henderson was elevated from assault to second-degree murder. In the days that followed, more details emerged. Margot, racked with guilt and facing intense scrutiny, admitted to the affair with Liam. Her statement, given through tears at the police station, provided a timeline of their relationship and the events leading up to that fateful afternoon. Thaddeus, advised by his hastily retained attorney, remained silent, but his colleagues at the company painted a picture of a man under immense pressure, working long hours in pursuit of a partnership that had seemed within reach. None, however, had suspected the depth of his marital problems or the capacity for violence that had been unleashed. The case against Thaddeus Henderson was building, but Rossi knew that in the court of public opinion, there would be no clear villains or heroes in this story. Only victims, each in their own way, of the secrets and lies that had finally come to light in the most devastating manner possible. For no one has ever expected the plot twist that's about to come. And twist that will shock everyone, including the Hendersons. The Henderson trial began on a crisp autumn morning, 6 months after the events that had shaken Riverside to its core. The county courthouse, a stately building of red brick and white columns, was surrounded by reporters and curious onlookers. Inside, the tension was palpable as the judge called the court to order. Prosecuting attorney Veronica Talbot, known for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue, laid out the state's case in her opening statement. She painted a vivid picture of Thaddeus Henderson as a man consumed by rage and jealousy, who had brutally murdered a young man in the prime of his life. Talbot's words were measured but impactful, her gaze sweeping across the jury as she promised to prove Henderson's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Defense attorney countered with a narrative of his own. He portrayed Thaddeus as a devoted husband and pillar of the community, pushed to the brink by a betrayal of the deepest kind. Sterling suggested that the death was a tragic accident, the result of a confrontation that had spiraled out of control. As the trial progressed, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Forensic experts testified about blood spatter patterns and the force required to cause Liam's fatal injury. Neighbors recounted the events of that day, and character witnesses spoke to the personalities and reputations of both Thaddeus and Liam. But it was Margot Henderson's testimony that captivated the courtroom. Over 2 grueling days on the stand, she laid bare the disintegration of her marriage and the evolution of her relationship with Liam. Her voice trembled as she described the moment Thaddeus had walked in on them and the horror of watching the confrontation unfold. Under cross-examination, Sterling tried to paint her as an unfaithful wife whose actions had driven her husband to temporary insanity. But Margot held firm, accepting her part in the tragedy while insisting that nothing justified Liam's death. Elaine Cooper's testimony was brief but powerful. Still grief-stricken, she spoke of her son's kindness and his dreams for the future, all cut short in an act of violence. Her quiet dignity in the face of unimaginable loss moved many in the courtroom to tears. As the trial neared its end, all eyes turned to Thaddeus Henderson. Against his lawyer's advice, he chose to take the stand. His testimony was a study in contrasts, moments of apparent remorse interspersed with flashes of the anger that had led to Liam's death. He spoke of the pressure he'd been under at work, the growing distance in his marriage, and the shock of discovering his wife's infidelity. When describing the fight with Liam, Thaddeus claimed he had never intended to cause serious harm, that he had simply lost control. As the trial progressed, expert witnesses from the field of psychology were called to provide insight into the minds of those involved in the tragic events. Dr. Cho explained that Thaddeus's actions could be understood through the lens of what psychologists call intermittent explosive disorder, characterized by episodes of violent, aggressive behavior disproportionate to the situation. She pointed to Thaddeus's high-stress job, his unexpressed marital dissatisfaction, and the shock of discovering his wife's infidelity as contributing factors to his violent outburst. However, under cross-examination, Dr. Cho conceded that while these factors could explain Thaddeus's behavior, they did not excuse it. She emphasized that many individuals face similar stressors without resorting to violence. The defense called a specialist in marriage and family therapy to testify about the psychological impact of infidelity. Friedman described the profound sense of betrayal and loss of identity that a person may experience upon discovering a spouse's affair. He likened it to a form of psychological trauma, capable of triggering extreme emotional responses. The psychological analyses presented during the trial offered a complex picture of human behavior and motivation. They highlighted how a combination of personal history, societal expectations, and immediate circumstances can collide to create a perfect storm of tragedy. After 7 grueling weeks of testimony, evidence presentation, and legal arguments, the fate of Thaddeus Henderson rested in the hands of the jury. As Judge Blackwell sent the 12 men and women to deliberate, a tense silence fell over the courtroom. After a short recess to consider all factors, Judge Blackwell returned to deliver her sentence. Citing the violent nature of the crime balanced against Thaddeus's lack of prior criminal history and the unique circumstances of the case, she sentenced him to 18 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 12 years. As Thaddeus was led away in handcuffs, the full weight of the tragedy seemed to descend upon the courtroom. There were no victors here, only lives irrevocably altered by a moment of passion and a split second of violence. Outside, as news of the verdict spread, the crowd's reactions were mixed. Some felt justice had been served, while others argued the sentence was too harsh or too lenient. But all agreed on one thing: the events that had unfolded in Riverside would leave an indelible mark on the community for years to come. In the quiet streets of Oak Ridge Heights, a picturesque suburban enclave, the Blackwood residence stood as a beacon of domestic bliss. To the casual observer, Zephyr and Lorelei Blackwood epitomized the American dream: successful careers, a beautifully maintained craftsman home, and a marriage that seemed to grow stronger with each passing year. Their neighbors often remarked on the couple's apparent devotion to one another, evidenced by their frequent dinner parties and synchronized jogging routines. But beneath the polished veneer of their seemingly perfect life, the Blackwoods harbored a secret that would ultimately lead to their undoing. For the past 2 years, Zephyr and Lorelei had been active participants in a local swinging community, a lifestyle choice that promised to add excitement and passion to their decade-long marriage. At first, their foray into the world of consensual non-monogamy seemed to reinvigorate their relationship. They spoke of feeling closer, more honest, and more in love than ever before. However, as with many things that glitter, the reality of their chosen path was far more complex and fraught with danger than either could have anticipated. What began as a mutual adventure in sexual exploration would eventually expose deep-seated insecurities and long-buried resentments. This is the story of how a couple's search for excitement and fulfillment led to jealousy, rage, and murder. Zephyr Blackwood was a rising star in the tech scene. With his sharp intellect and innovative ideas, he had quickly climbed the corporate ladder at a leading software company. Colleagues described him as driven, charismatic, and occasionally intense. Standing tall in a runner's physique, Zephyr turned heads wherever he went. Despite his professional success, those closest to him noted a persistent undercurrent of insecurity, stemming from a childhood marked by his parents' messy divorce and his father's subsequent absence. Lorelei Blackwood was Zephyr's perfect complement. A talented freelance graphic designer, She balanced her husband's Type A personality with her more laid-back, creative approach to life. With her warm eyes, infectious laugh, and curves that defied her dedication to yoga, Lorelai was the kind of person who made friends easily and kept them for life. Growing up in a large, boisterous family, she valued connection and openness above all else. The couple met during their senior year at the university. Zephyr was immediately drawn to Lorelai's free spirit and artistic talent, while she found herself captivated by his ambition and hidden vulnerability. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a beachside proposal just 6 months after graduation, and they married a year later in a lavish ceremony that was the talk of their social circle. For the first 7 years of their marriage, Zephyr and Lorelai seemed to have it all. They traveled extensively, built successful careers, and created a home that was the envy of their friends. However, as they approached their mid-30s, a sense of restlessness began to creep into their relationship. The passion that had once burned so brightly had dimmed to a comfortable but uninspiring glow. It was Lorelai who first broached the subject of exploring new avenues in their sex life. Always the more sexually adventurous of the two, she suggested they attend a few workshops on tantric practices and BDSM. Zephyr, eager to please his wife and reignite their spark, agreed enthusiastically. These workshops opened up new channels of communication between the couple, and they found themselves discussing fantasies and desires they had never before shared. It was during one of these conversations that the topic of swinging first arose. Lorelai had read about it online and was intrigued by the idea of consensual non-monogamy. Zephyr, initially hesitant, warmed to the concept as Lorelai painted a picture of increased intimacy and shared adventures. After months of discussion, research, and soul-searching, the Blackwoods decided to take the plunge. They created profiles on swinger websites, attended a few meet-and-greet events, and finally participated in their first full swap with another couple. The experience was exhilarating, and for a time it seemed to breathe new life into their marriage. Little did they know that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to tragedy. The Blackwoods' entry into the world of swinging was marked by a mix of nervous excitement and cautious optimism. Their first experience, a soft swap with a couple they met through a reputable swinger website, exceeded their expectations. The evening was filled with laughter, flirtation, and a level of sexual tension that neither Zephyr nor Lorelai had experienced in years. As they drove home, hands intertwined, they couldn't stop grinning at each other, already planning their next encounter. Over the next few months, Zephyr and Lorelai became regulars in swinging scene. They attended parties at upscale clubs, participated in intimate gatherings at private homes, and even organized a few events of their own. Their social circle expanded rapidly, filled with like-minded couples who shared their desire for excitement and sexual exploration. Lorelai, in particular, thrived in this new environment. Her natural charisma and open-mindedness made her a favorite among their swinging friends. She reveled in the attention she received from both men and women, and her confidence soared. Zephyr, too, seemed to flourish initially. He enjoyed the ego boost that came from other women finding him attractive, and he took pride in having a wife that others desired. The couple's sex life, both with others and between themselves, reached new heights of passion and intensity. They found themselves experimenting with fantasies and kinks they had never before considered. Lorelai would often joke that they were having more sex now than they did in their first year of marriage. As they became more comfortable with the lifestyle, the Blackwoods began to form deeper connections with some of the couples they met. They particularly clicked with Ether and Nova Sterling, a pair of free-spirited artists who had been in the swinging scene for years. The four of them often got together for dinner and drinks, which would invariably lead to steamy encounters that left everyone satisfied. However, as the months wore on, subtle changes began to occur in the dynamics of Zephyr and Lorelai's relationship. While Lorelai continued to embrace the lifestyle with enthusiasm, Zephyr started to show signs of discomfort. He began to notice the way other men looked at his wife, the ease with which she flirted and connected with their swinging partners. What had once been a source of pride now stirred uncomfortable feelings in the pit of his stomach. Zephyr found himself paying closer attention to Lorelai's interactions, especially with Ether Sterling. He couldn't help but notice the lingering touches, the inside jokes, the way Lorelai's eyes seemed to light up in Ether's presence. Rational thought told him that this was all part of the game, that Lorelai always came home with him at the end of the night. But a nagging voice in the back of his mind whispered doubts and fueled his growing insecurity. Despite his misgivings, Zephyr kept his feelings to himself. He didn't want to disappoint Lorelei or appear weak in front of their new friends. Instead, he threw himself into the lifestyle with renewed vigor, as if trying to prove something to himself and others. He initiated more encounters, suggested wilder scenarios, and pushed his boundaries further than he was truly comfortable with. Lorelei, caught up in the excitement and new experiences, failed to notice the subtle changes in her husband's behavior. She interpreted his increased enthusiasm as a sign that he was enjoying the lifestyle as much as she was. In her mind, swinging had brought them closer together, opening up new avenues of communication and shared experiences. As their second anniversary in the lifestyle approached, the Blackwoods were seen as a success story in their swinging circle. They were attractive, fun, and seemingly more in love than ever. But beneath the surface, the seeds of discord had been sown. The very lifestyle that had reinvigorated their marriage was now silently driving a wedge between them, setting the stage for the tragic events that were to come. The first signs of trouble in the Blackwoods' seemingly perfect arrangement appeared subtly at first. Zephyr began to make offhand comments about cutting back on their swinging activities, suggesting they focus more on their own relationship. Lorelei, interpreting this as a passing mood, gently brushed off his concerns and encouraged him to embrace the freedom and excitement they had discovered. As weeks passed, Zephyr's jealousy grew more pronounced. He started to question Lorelei about her interactions with other men, particularly Ether Sterling. His inquiries, initially casual, became more frequent and intense. Where once he had enjoyed watching Lorelei with other partners, he now found himself averting his eyes, a knot forming in his stomach. Lorelei, for her part, struggled to understand the change in her husband. She repeatedly assured him of her love and commitment, emphasizing that their adventures in swinging were purely physical and did not threaten their emotional bond. But her words seemed to fall on deaf ears as Zephyr's insecurities deepened. The tension between them began to spill over into their daily lives. Arguments that started about swinging quickly devolved into broader accusations and recriminations. Zephyr would bring up past grievances, questioning Lorelei's fidelity even before they entered the lifestyle. Lorelei, frustrated by what she saw as Zephyr's irrational behavior, found herself becoming defensive and withdrawn. Their professional lives started to suffer as well. Zephyr, usually laser-focused at work, became distracted and irritable. His colleagues noticed the change, whispering about possible troubles at home. Lorelei, whose work required creativity and a positive outlook, found it increasingly difficult to meet deadlines and satisfy clients. Despite the growing discord, Lorelei was reluctant to give up the lifestyle that had brought her so much joy and self-discovery. She suggested they take a break from group activities and focus on one-on-one encounters, hoping this would ease Zephyr's jealousy. But even this compromise led to conflict, with Zephyr accusing Lorelei of trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. As their arguments intensified, the Blackwoods' facade of domestic bliss began to crumble. In a last-ditch effort to salvage their marriage, Zephyr suggested they seek counseling. Lorelei agreed, hoping that a professional could help them navigate the complex emotions stirred up by their foray into non-monogamy. However, finding a therapist who was both qualified and non-judgmental about their lifestyle proved challenging, further adding to their frustration. As the date of an upcoming swinger party hosted by the Sterlings approached, the tension in the Blackwood household reached a fever pitch. Lorelei was determined to attend, seeing it as an opportunity to reconnect with friends and reaffirm their place in the community. Zephyr, conflicted and resentful, reluctantly agreed to go, setting the stage for the tragic events that would unfold. The evening of May 15th dawned warm and clear, a perfect spring day. As twilight approached, the Blackwoods began preparing for the Sterlings' party, with an undercurrent of tension thrumming between them. Lorelei hummed to herself as she applied her makeup, choosing a slinky black dress that accentuated her curves. Zephyr, watching her from the doorway, felt a familiar mix of desire and dread coiling in his stomach. They arrived at the Sterlings' upscale loft just as the party was getting started. The spacious apartment was bathed in soft, colorful lights, with sensual music pulsing through hidden speakers. Couples and singles mingled, drinks in hand, the air thick with anticipation and pheromones. Nova Sterling, resplendent in a shimmering gold jumpsuit, greeted them warmly. Zephyr couldn't help but notice how her embrace with Lorelei lingered, the two women exchanging knowing smiles. Ether appeared moments later, clapping Zephyr on the back before placing a gentle kiss on Lorelai's cheek. The knot in Zephyr's stomach tightened. As the night progressed, Zephyr found himself growing increasingly agitated. He watched as Lorelai flitted from group to group, her laughter carrying across the room. She seemed to be in her element, radiating confidence and sensuality. In contrast, Zephyr felt awkward and out of place, nursing the same drink for hours as he observed the interactions around him. The party began to shift gears as couples started to pair off or form small groups, disappearing into the various playrooms the Sterlings had set up. Zephyr lost sight of Lorelai for a while, his anxiety spiking as he searched the crowded loft. He finally spotted her in deep conversation with Ether, their heads close together as they spoke in low tones. Unable to contain himself any longer, Zephyr approached the pair. He caught the tail end of their conversation, something about meeting up later in the week for coffee. Lorelai's eyes widened slightly as she noticed Zephyr, a flicker of guilt crossing her face before she composed herself. Zephyr, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, suggested it was time to leave. Lorelai protested, arguing that the night hasn't ended. Their disagreement, though conducted in hushed tones, drew curious glances from nearby guests. Ether, sensing the tension, tried to smooth things over, but his intervention only seemed to irritate Zephyr further. As the argument threatened to escalate, Nova appeared, smoothly inserting herself into the situation. With practiced ease, she guided Zephyr and Lorelai to a quiet corner of the loft, encouraging them to take a moment to cool off. She offered them water and gentle words of advice, reminding them of the community's emphasis on open communication and mutual respect. For a brief moment, it seemed as though Nova's intervention had diffused the situation. Zephyr took a deep breath, visibly trying to calm himself. Lorelai reached out, squeezing his hand in a conciliatory gesture. But as they stood to rejoin the party, Zephyr caught sight of Ether watching them intently. Something in the other man's gaze, concern, pity, or perhaps something else entirely, caused Zephyr's tenuous control to snap. In a cold, clipped voice, he announced that he and Lorelai were leaving. This time, Lorelai didn't argue. She could see the storm brewing behind Zephyr's eyes and knew that staying would only lead to a scene. Apologizing profusely to Nova and avoiding Ether's gaze, Lorelai allowed Zephyr to lead her out of the loft. The drive home was fraught with silence, the tension between them so thick it was almost suffocating. Lorelai stared out the window, her earlier vivacity replaced by a wary exhaustion. Zephyr gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, his jaw clenched as he navigated the nearly empty streets. As they pulled into their driveway, neither made a move to exit the car immediately. For a long moment they sat in silence, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on them. Finally, Lorelai turned to Zephyr, her voice soft but firm as she said, "We need to talk about this. We can't go on like this." Zephyr nodded stiffly, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Without a word, he got out of the car and headed for the front door. Lorelai followed, her heart heavy with the knowledge that the conversation to come would likely change their lives forever. Neither of them could have predicted just how prophetic that feeling would prove to be. As soon as the front door closed behind them, the facade of calm they had maintained in public crumbled. Zephyr rounded on Lorelai, his face contorted with a mix of anger and pain. The words tumbled out of him in a torrent of accusations and grievances, all the doubts and fears he had been harboring for months finally finding voice. He raged about her behavior at the party, the way she had flirted openly with Ether and others. He brought up past encounters, dissecting them with jealous scrutiny, finding evidence of betrayal in the smallest gestures and glances. His voice rose as he spoke of the coffee plans he had overheard, convinced it was proof of an ongoing affair. Lorelai, initially stunned by the ferocity of Zephyr's outburst, found her own anger rising to meet his. She defended herself vehemently, reminding him that openness and honesty had always been the foundation of their relationship and their foray into swinging. She accused him of hypocrisy, pointing out his own enthusiastic participation in their lifestyle choice until recently. Their argument echoed through the house, a cacophony of hurt feelings and misunderstandings. Lorelai tried to reason with Zephyr, to make him see that his jealousy was unfounded, but her words seemed to bounce off him without making an impact. In frustration, she brought up his own dalliances within the swinging community, asking why it was acceptable for him, but not for her. This only served to enrage Zephyr further. He advanced on Lorelai, his tall frame looming over her as he backed her into a corner of their living room. Lorelei, feeling trapped and increasingly frightened by Zephyr's uncharacteristic aggression, attempted to push past him. In that moment, something in Zephyr snapped. As Lorelei tried to move away, he grabbed her arms, his fingers digging into her skin with bruising force. Lorelei cried out in pain and surprise, her eyes wide with disbelief as she stared at the man she had loved for over a decade, suddenly unrecognizable in his fury. She struggled against his grip, her own anger giving way to fear as she realized how out of control the situation had become. Zephyr, lost in a haze of jealousy and rage, didn't seem to hear her pleas to let go. In her desperation to break free, Lorelei's hand caught Zephyr across the face, her nails leaving angry red scratches on his cheek. The physical contact seemed to push Zephyr over the edge. With a roar of inarticulate rage, he shoved Lorelei hard. She stumbled backwards, her heel catching on the edge of the area rug. Time seemed to slow as she fell, her arms flailing as she tried to catch herself. But there was nothing to break her fall, and her head struck the corner of the solid oak coffee table with a sickening thud. The sound seemed to snap Zephyr out of his frenzy. He stood frozen, watching in horror as Lorelei crumpled to the floor, a small pool of blood beginning to form beneath her head. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Zephyr's ragged breathing. For several long moments, he remained rooted to the spot, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Then, as if moving through molasses, he stumbled towards Lorelei's motionless form. He fell to his knees beside her, hands shaking as he reached out to touch her. Her skin was still warm, but as he frantically searched for a pulse, he found nothing. The reality of the situation crashed over Zephyr like a tidal wave. He had done the unthinkable. In a moment of uncontrolled anger, he had taken the life of the woman he loved. As the enormity of his actions began to sink in, Zephyr let out a howl of anguish, cradling Lorelei's lifeless body in his arms as tears streamed down his face. In the quiet suburban street outside, a neighbor who had been walking his dog paused, startled by the sound of despair emanating from the Blackwood residence. It was a cry that would haunt the neighborhood for years to come, marking the moment when a loving marriage ended in unimaginable tragedy. The early morning calm of Oak Ridge Heights was shattered by the arrival of police cruisers and an ambulance, their lights painting the tree-lined street in alternating flashes of red and blue. Neighbors emerged from their homes as they watched the unfolding scene, with a mix of curiosity and dread. Detective Rhiannon Frost, a veteran of Homicide Division, arrived on the scene shortly after the first responders. As she ducked under the crime scene tape, she was struck by the contrast between the manicured exterior of the Blackwood home and the chaos that awaited inside. The living room, once a showcase of tasteful decor, now bore the unmistakable signs of violence. The coffee table was askew. A lamp lay shattered on the floor, and at the center of it all was the body of Lorelei Blackwood, partially covered by a sheet. Forensic technicians moved around the room with practiced efficiency, photographing and collecting evidence. Frost's keen eyes took in every detail. Dr. Kai Nakamura briefed her on their initial findings. The cause of death appeared to be blunt force trauma to the head, likely from impact with the corner of the coffee table. Signs of a struggle were evident, including bruising on the victim's arms and defensive wounds on her hands. As Nakamura spoke, Frost's attention was drawn to the figure of Zephyr Blackwood, seated on a dining room chair, his head in his hands. He was still wearing the clothes from the previous night's party, now rumpled and stained. A uniformed officer stood nearby, keeping a watchful eye on the distraught husband. Frost approached Zephyr, her experienced gaze noting his scratched cheek and the smears of blood on his shirt. In a voice hoarse from crying, he began to speak, weaving a tale of a party, an argument, and a tragic accident. As she listened, Frost's instincts told her there was more to the story than Zephyr was revealing. His account seemed rehearsed, lacking the raw emotion one would expect from a man who had just lost his wife. She made a mental note to dig deeper into the couple's background and recent activities. Outside, the neighbors huddled in small groups, exchanging shocked whispers and speculative glances. The Blackwoods had always seemed so happy, so perfect. What could have gone so terribly wrong? In the days following Lorelei Blackwood's death, Detective Frost and her team worked tirelessly to piece together the events that led to that fateful night. Their investigation began to reveal a complex web of relationships and hidden tensions that lay beneath the surface of the Blackwoods' seemingly idyllic life. Interviews with friends and colleagues painted a picture of a couple who had recently embraced the swinging lifestyle. While many expressed surprise at this revelation, a select few provided valuable insights into the dynamics of the Blackwoods' open marriage. Nova Sterling, in particular, proved to be a crucial witness, recounting the argument she had witnessed at the party and the obvious tension between Zephyr and Lorelei. As the detectives delved deeper, they uncovered a trail of digital evidence that shed light on the couple's private life. Text messages and emails revealed Zephyr's growing jealousy and Lorelei's increasing frustration with his behavior. Particularly damning was a series of messages between Lorelei and Ether Sterling, discussing Zephyr's recent mood swings and Lorelei's concerns about the future of her marriage. Forensic analysis of the crime scene yielded more damning evidence against Zephyr. The angle and force of Lorelei's fatal injury were inconsistent with a simple fall. DNA evidence under Lorelei's fingernails matched Zephyr's, corroborating the signs of a struggle. Furthermore, toxicology reports showed that while Lorelei had a modest amount of alcohol in her system, Zephyr's blood alcohol level had been significantly higher, suggesting he may have been more impaired than he initially claimed. As the investigation progressed, Detective Frost brought Zephyr in for a series of intense interrogations. Under the relentless pressure of questioning, his carefully constructed narrative began to crumble. Inconsistencies in his story emerged, and his demeanor shifted from grief-stricken widow to a man consumed by guilt and fear. In a dramatic turn of events, Ether Sterling came forward with additional information. He revealed that Lorelei had confided in him about her plans to leave Zephyr, citing his increasingly controlling and jealous behavior. This revelation provided a possible motive for Zephyr's actions, suggesting that the murder may have been premeditated rather than a heat-of-the-moment crime of passion. The investigation also uncovered financial records indicating that Zephyr had recently inquired about the couple's life insurance policies, adding another layer of suspicion to his actions. Friends reported that he had been under increasing stress at work, with rumors of potential layoffs circulating in his company. As the evidence mounted, the prosecution began to build a strong case against Zephyr Blackwood. The narrative that emerged was one of a man who, faced with the prospect of losing both his wife and his carefully cultivated image of success, had lashed out in a jealous rage with tragic consequences. The stage was set for a trial that would captivate the city and beyond, promising to expose the hidden world of suburban swingers and the devastating consequences of jealousy unleashed. Prosecutor Vivian Zhao opened the proceedings with a powerful statement, painting a vivid picture of a marriage destroyed by jealousy and a woman's life cut tragically short. She promised to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Zephyr Blackwood had murdered his wife in a fit of rage, driven by his inability to control her and his fear of losing her. The defense countered with a narrative of a tragic accident, the result of a loving marriage strained by lifestyle choices that neither party was fully prepared for. Holloway sought to portray Zephyr as a devoted husband, overwhelmed by circumstances beyond his control. As the trial progressed, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Nova and Ether Sterling provided crucial testimony about the Blackwoods' involvement in the swinging community and the visible tension between them on the night of Lorelei's death. Their accounts were both illuminating and scandalous, causing a stir in the courtroom and generating salacious headlines. Forensic experts presented detailed analyses of the crime scene, with Dr. Kai Nakamura delivering damning testimony about the nature of Lorelei's injuries. His assertion that the fatal wound was inconsistent with an accidental fall dealt a significant blow to the defense's case. Perhaps the most dramatic moment of the trial came when Zephyr Blackwood himself took the stand. Under Holloway's careful guidance, he presented himself as a man deeply in love with his wife, who had agreed to explore swinging to please her. He spoke of his growing discomfort with the lifestyle and his fears that he was losing Lorelei to it. However, under Zhao's relentless cross-examination, Zephyr's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. She confronted him with text messages, emails, and witness statements that contradicted his version of events. As the questioning intensified, Zephyr's composure slipped, revealing flashes of the anger and jealousy that had led to that fatal night. The gallery watched in rapt attention as Zephyr struggled to maintain his story under the prosecution's onslaught. His voice cracked as he recounted the final argument with Lorelei, and for a moment, it seemed as though he might break down and confess. But he managed to hold himself together, sticking to his claim of a tragic accident to the end. As the trial neared its conclusion, both the prosecution and defense delivered impassioned closing arguments. So urged the jury to see through Zephyr's lies and hold him accountable for the brutal act that had ended Lorelei's life. Holloway, in turn, pleaded for understanding, asking the jury to consider the complex emotions and circumstances that had led to this tragedy. With the evidence presented and arguments made, the case was turned over to the jury. As they filed out to begin deliberations, a tense hush fell over the courtroom. The fate of Zephyr Blackwood now rested in their hands. In the end, the jury took less than 6 hours to reach a verdict. Zephyr Blackwood was found guilty of second-degree murder, a decision that sent shockwaves through the community and brought a measure of closure to Lorelei's grieving family and friends. The judge, citing the brutal nature of the crime and Zephyr's lack of remorse, sentenced him to 25 years to life in prison. The aftermath of the trial left an indelible mark on the community. The case had exposed the hidden world of suburban swingers, leading to heated debates about morality, trust, and the nature of modern relationships. Some couples who had been part of the lifestyle quietly distanced themselves, while others became vocal advocates for ethical non-monogamy, emphasizing the importance of communication and consent. In the end, the tragic story of Zephyr and Lorelei Blackwood served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the strongest relationships can be undone by jealousy, mistrust, and uncontrolled anger. Their story would be remembered not just as a sensational crime, but as a complex human tragedy, born from the eternal struggle between love, desire, and the need for control. The local high school in Oakville stood as a pillar of the community, shaping the minds of the town's youth for generations. It was here, in the fall of 2022, that a chilling series of events would unfold, forever shattering the town's sense of security and innocence. At the center of this harrowing tale were two individuals. Miranda Jarvis, a vibrant 18-year-old senior, was the epitome of small-town charm. With her long auburn hair, bright green eyes, and a smile that could light up a room, Miranda was beloved by her peers and teachers alike. She excelled in her studies, particularly in English literature, and harbored dreams of becoming a writer. Enter Mark Reynolds, a 32-year-old substitute teacher who arrived in Oakville with a mysterious past and a quiet demeanor that initially endeared him to the faculty and students. As the crisp autumn air settled over Oakville, no one could have predicted the dark storm brewing on the horizon. The story that unfolded over the following months would test the limits of human obsession, challenge the town's faith in its institutions, and leave an indelible mark on all those involved. This is the true account of how a substitute teacher's unhealthy fixation on a student spiraled into a nightmare that would haunt Oakville for years to come. Miranda Jarvis was born and raised in Oakville, the only child of James and Lucy Jarvis. Her father owned the local hardware store, while her mother worked as a nurse at the town's small hospital. From a young age, Miranda displayed a precocious intelligence and a vivid imagination that set her apart from her peers. Throughout her childhood and teenage years, Miranda's passion for literature and writing blossomed. She devoured classic novels, penned short stories, and kept a detailed journal of her thoughts and experiences. Her teachers often praised her insightful essays and creative writing pieces, predicting a bright future for the young wordsmith. Miranda's life wasn't without its challenges. In her sophomore year, her parents went through a rough patch in their marriage, leading to a brief separation. The experience deeply affected Miranda, and she channeled her emotions into her writing. Mark Reynolds' path to Oakville High School was far from conventional. Born in a bustling city on the East Coast, Mark had always been drawn to the world of literature and academia. He excelled in his studies, particularly in English and philosophy. Despite his academic achievements, Mark struggled to find his footing in the professional world. He began his career as a high school English teacher in his hometown, where he quickly gained a reputation for his engaging teaching style and deep knowledge of literature. However, after 3 years, Mark abruptly resigned from his position under mysterious circumstances. Rumors circulated about an inappropriate relationship with a student, but nothing was ever proven, and no charges were filed. Following this setback, Mark drifted from job to job, never staying in one place for too long. He worked as a copywriter, a bookstore clerk, and even tried his hand at writing a novel. But success eluded him. As the years passed, a sense of bitterness and resentment began to take root in Mark's psyche. He felt that the world had denied him the recognition and success he deserved. The crisp morning air of September 15, 2022, held no hint of the pivotal moment about to unfold within the walls of Oakville School. As students filed into Mrs. Henderson's advanced English literature class, a buzz of curiosity filled the room. Their regular teacher was out on maternity leave, and today they would meet their long-term substitute. Mark Reynolds stood at the front of the classroom. He introduced himself with a quiet confidence. As he began to discuss the semester's curriculum, focusing on Gothic literature, many students found themselves drawn in by his evident passion for the subject. It was during this introduction that Mark's eyes first fell on Miranda Jarvis, seated in the second row, her hair catching the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. Miranda listened with rapt attention. When Mark posed a question about the themes in Edgar Allan Poe's works, Miranda's hand shot up, and she offered an insightful analysis that caught the substitute teacher off guard. Mark, impressed by her eloquence, engaged Miranda in a brief discussion about Poe's use of symbolism. As they talked, he noticed the spark of intelligence in her green eyes, the way she articulated her thoughts with a maturity beyond her years. For a moment, Mark felt a connection he hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of intellectual discourse with a kindred spirit. As the class progressed, Mark found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Miranda. He called on her often, each time feeling a small surge of excitement at her thoughtful responses. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the period, Miranda lingered behind, approaching Mark's desk with a copy of her favorite Poe story, The Fall of the House of Usher. They engaged in a brief but animated discussion about the story's Gothic elements and psychological undertones. As Miranda turned to leave, she smiled warmly at Mark, thanking him for the engaging class. Mark watched her go, a strange mix of emotions stirring within him, admiration, intrigue, and something darker that he couldn't quite name. That night, as Mark sat alone in his rented room, his thoughts kept drifting back to Miranda. He told himself it was merely the excitement of finding a promising student, someone who shared his passion for literature. But deep down, in a part of his psyche he dared not examine too closely, Mark knew that something had shifted. The seed of obsession had been planted, and it would soon grow into a twisted, all-consuming force that would change everything. In the weeks following that first encounter, Mark Reynolds' fixation on Miranda Jarvis grew at an alarming rate. Mark found himself looking forward to his advanced English literature class with an intensity that both thrilled and unsettled him. As September gave way to October, Mark's behavior began to change in subtle but significant ways. He started arriving at school earlier, hoping to catch a glimpse of Miranda in the hallways. He lingered in the teacher's lounge, eavesdropping on conversations about students, his ears perking up at any mention of her name. Mark's nights were increasingly consumed by thoughts of Miranda. He pored over her essays, reading and rereading them long after he had finished grading. He began to imagine conversations with her, picturing scenarios where they could interact outside of class. In his mind, Miranda understood him in a way no one else ever had. One evening, while grading papers, Mark came across a personal essay Miranda had written about her aspirations to become a writer. The raw honesty and vulnerability in her words struck a chord deep within him. That night, he crossed a line he had never dared to before. He searched for Miranda on social media. Mark spent hours scrolling through Miranda's public posts, absorbing every detail of her life outside of school. He learned about her favorite books, her hobbies, the cafes she frequented with her friends. Each new piece of information fed his growing obsession, making him feel closer to her. As his fixation intensified, Mark's teaching began to suffer. He would lose his train of thought mid-lecture, distracted by Miranda's presence. Other students noticed his frequent glances in her direction, the way his voice would soften when addressing her. Whispers and giggles sometimes rippled through the classroom, but Mark was oblivious to everything except Miranda. Outside of school, Mark's life began to revolve around his obsession. He started frequenting the local library where Miranda volunteered, pretending to browse books while watching her from afar. He would drive past her house on his way home, his heart racing at the thought of catching a glimpse of her through a window. Mark knew on some level that his behavior was inappropriate and potentially dangerous. There were moments of clarity when he would be struck by the magnitude of his obsession, and he would resolve to put it behind him. But these moments were fleeting, quickly overwhelmed by the intoxicating pull of his fixation on Miranda. As October drew to a close, Mark's obsession reached a fever pitch. He began to fantasize about a future with Miranda, convincing himself that she must feel the same connection he did. The line between reality and his twisted imagination blurred, setting the stage for the disturbing events that were about to unfold. The first truly alarming incident occurred on a chilly November afternoon. Miranda had stayed after class to discuss a paper with Mark, unaware of the tempest brewing within her teacher. As she gathered her things to leave, Mark impulsively reached out and touched her hand, ostensibly to take the paper she was handing him. The contact lasted only a second, but it sent a jolt through Mark's system. Miranda, startled by the unexpected touch, quickly withdrew her hand. She noticed a strange intensity in Mark's eyes that made her uncomfortable. Mumbling a hasty goodbye, she hurried out of the classroom, leaving Mark standing there, his hand still tingling from the brief contact. That evening, Miranda confided in her best friend Lily about the odd interaction. While Lily brushed it off as nothing serious, Miranda couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it left her with. She resolved to be more cautious around Mr. Reynolds, but didn't want to make a big deal out of what could have been an innocent mistake. Mark, on the other hand, spent the night reliving that moment of contact. In his mind, it became a significant event, a sign that his feelings for Miranda were reciprocated. 2 weeks after the hand-touching incident, Mark's behavior took an even more concerning turn. During lunch period, he overheard Miranda telling a friend about a poetry reading at a local bookstore that evening. Unable to resist the temptation, Mark decided to attend. That night, he sat in the back of the dimly lit bookstore, watching as Miranda and her friends arrived. Throughout the reading, Mark's eyes never left Miranda. He observed every laugh, every thoughtful nod, every whispered comment to her friends. In his mind, he was sharing the experience with her, part of her world. As the event ended and people began to leave, Miranda spotted Mark. Surprise and a flicker of unease crossed her face. She approached him hesitantly, asking if he had enjoyed the reading. Mark, caught off guard, stumbled through a response, his usual eloquence deserting him. Miranda quickly excused herself, visibly uncomfortable. As she left with her friends, Mark overheard her whispering, "He's everywhere lately. It's kind of creepy." The words hit Mark like a physical blow, but instead of serving as a wake-up call, they only intensified his obsession. The situation reached a critical point in early December. Miranda had been avoiding staying after class and tried to minimize her interactions with Mark. Frustrated and increasingly desperate, Mark made a decision that would irreversibly cross the line. Using the emergency contact information from the school records, Mark obtained Miranda's home address. One evening, he drove to her house, parking down the street. He sat there for hours, watching the Jarvis residence, imagining Miranda inside going about her evening routine. As luck would have it, Miranda stepped out to take out the trash. When she spotted Mark's car, recognition dawned on her face, quickly followed by fear. She hurried back inside, locking the door behind her. Panicked, Mark drove away, his mind racing. He knew he had gone too far, but he couldn't stop himself. The next day at school, Miranda was absent. When she returned the following day, she looked pale and avoided eye contact with Mark. Unbeknownst to Mark, Miranda had reported the incident to her parents and the school principal. An investigation was quietly launched, but before any action could be taken, the situation would take a dramatic and tragic turn. The morning of December 15, 2022, dawned cold and gray in Oakville. As families across town began their daily routines, Lucy Jarvis knocked on her daughter's bedroom door, calling out that breakfast was ready. When she received no response, Lucy opened the door, expecting to find Miranda still asleep. Instead, she was met with an empty, undisturbed bed. Panic quickly set in as Lucy and James Jarvis searched their home, calling Miranda's name. Her car was still in the driveway, her phone left on her nightstand. There was no sign of forced entry, no note left behind. It was as if Miranda had simply vanished into thin air. The Jarvis immediately called the police, and within hours, the quiet town of Oakville was transformed into a hive of activity. Police cars patrolled the streets, and search parties were organized to comb through nearby woods and parks. As the search for Miranda Jarvis entered its second week, the Oakville Police Department's investigation shifted into high gear. Detective Lucy Reeves, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving complex cases, took the lead. Her first order of business was to re-interview everyone in Miranda's life, starting with her closest friends and family. Lily Thompson recounted to Detective Reeves the growing unease Miranda had expressed about Mr. Reynolds' behavior in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. She mentioned the incident at the poetry reading and Miranda's discomfort with Mr. Reynolds' increasing presence in her life. On December 23rd, Detective Reeves brought Mark Reynolds in for formal questioning. In the stark interrogation room of the police station, Mark sat across from Reeves, his usual composure noticeably shaken. Detective Reeves began the interview casually, asking about Mark's background and his time at Oakville School. As the questions turned to his relationship with Miranda, Mark's responses became increasingly evasive. He denied any inappropriate behavior, insisting that his interest in Miranda was purely academic. But when confronted with evidence of his presence outside Miranda's house the night before her disappearance, Mark's facade began to crack. He stammered through an explanation about wanting to drop off some books for Miranda to read over the winter break. But his story was full of inconsistencies. As the interrogation wore on, Detective Reeves noticed Mark's right hand constantly fidgeting with something in his pocket. When asked to empty his pockets, Mark hesitated before reluctantly pulling out a delicate silver charm bracelet. With a sinking feeling, Reeves recognized it as the bracelet Miranda was wearing in the most recent photos her parents had provided. Mark's possession of Miranda's personal item was damning. He was immediately arrested on suspicion of involvement in Miranda's disappearance. As he was led away in handcuffs, Mark maintained his innocence, his eyes wild with a mix of fear and something darker that sent chills down Detective Reeves' spine. The news of Mark Reynolds' arrest sent shockwaves through Oakville. The community struggled to reconcile the image of the quiet, intellectual substitute teacher with the disturbing allegations against him. Parents demanded answers from the school board about how such a person had been allowed to teach their children. As the investigation continued, police executed a search warrant on Mark's rented room. Hidden in a locked drawer, detectives discovered a journal filled with rambling entries about Miranda. The evidence painted a chilling picture of Mark's deteriorating mental state and his unhealthy fixation on Miranda. But one crucial question remained unanswered. Where was Miranda Jarvis? Despite Mark's arrest and the damning evidence against him, there was still no trace of the missing girl. One entry, dated December 14th, caught Detective Reeves' attention. In it, Mark wrote about a special place where he and Miranda could be together forever, away from the judgmental eyes of the world. The entry was vague, but it mentioned an abandoned property on the outskirts of town. Acting on this lead, police conducted a thorough search of abandoned buildings in the area. On December 27th, their efforts paid off when they discovered an old dilapidated cabin deep in the woods outside Oakville. As officers approached the cabin, they noticed signs of recent activity, fresh tire tracks in the mud and a faint smell of smoke from the chimney. With hearts racing, the police team breached the cabin. Inside, they found evidence of someone living there recently. Food wrappers, a makeshift bed, and most disturbingly, several of Miranda's personal items scattered around the room. But there was no sign of Miranda herself. Meanwhile, Mark Reynolds remained in custody, stubbornly maintaining his innocence despite the mounting evidence against him. During interrogations, he alternated between proclaiming his love for Miranda and insisting that he was being framed. His erratic behavior led the district attorney to order a psychological evaluation. Volunteers joined the police in searching the woods, hoping to find any trace of Miranda. In a surprising turn of events, on December 30th, Lily Thompson came forward with new information. Trembling and visibly distressed, she revealed to Detective Reeves that she had been withholding crucial details out of fear and misplaced loyalty. Lily recounted a conversation she had with Miranda just days before her disappearance. Miranda had confided in her about a secret online relationship she had been having with someone she met in a writing forum. This revelation shifted the focus of the investigation. While Mark Reynolds remained a person of interest, the police now had to consider the possibility that Miranda's disappearance was connected to this mysterious online figure. The IP address used by the user in the writing forum was traced back to a computer in the Oakville School Library. Cross-referencing the times of the online interactions with the school's records, Reeves found that they coincided perfectly with Mark Reynolds' free periods. This revelation cast the entire case in a new light. Mark hadn't just been obsessing over Miranda from afar. He had been actively manipulating her, creating a false persona to gain her trust and lure her into a meeting. Armed with this new information, Reeves confronted Mark in another intense interrogation. Initially, he tried to maintain his innocence, but as Reeves laid out the evidence piece by piece, Mark's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. In a chilling moment, Mark's demeanor suddenly shifted. Gone was the nervous, protesting teacher, replaced by a cold, calculating individual. With an unsettling calmness, he began to reveal the full extent of his deception. Mark admitted to creating the online persona months earlier. Long before he came to Oakville, he had been grooming Miranda online, gaining her trust and fueling her dreams of becoming a writer. It was just after dawn when a search dog picked up a scent. Following the dog's lead, rescuers pushed deeper into the forest, hope and dread warring in their hearts. As they crested a small hill, they spotted a flash of color against the dull winter landscape: Miranda's bright blue jacket. Miranda Jarvis was found huddled in the hollow of an old oak tree, cold, dehydrated, and terrified, but alive. As Miranda recovered in the hospital, surrounded by her overjoyed parents and a protective police presence, the full story of her ordeal came to light. She recounted how she had agreed to meet mysterious online user at the cabin, believing it to be a surprise arranged by a supportive mentor. The shock and terror she felt upon discovering Mark's true identity drove her to flee into the woods, where she had been wandering and hiding for over 2 weeks, surviving on stream water and whatever edible plants she could recognize. The aftermath of Miranda's rescue and Mark's arrest was far-reaching. The school faced intense scrutiny over its hiring practices and student protection policies. Several administrators resigned in the wake of the scandal, and the school board implemented stringent new background check procedures for all staff. Mark was convicted on multiple charges, including kidnapping, stalking, and child endangerment. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, without the possibility of parole. For Miranda and her family, the road to recovery was long and challenging. Miranda underwent extensive therapy to deal with the trauma of her experience. She found solace in writing, using her journal to process her emotions, and eventually turning her story into a powerful memoir that would go on to help other survivors of stalking and abuse. As for Oakville, the town would never be quite the same. The innocence of small-town life had been shattered, replaced by a wary vigilance. Yet in the face of this tragedy, the community had come together, demonstrating the power of collective action and the resilience of the human spirit. The case of Miranda Jarvis and Mark Reynolds serves as a chilling reminder of the dark undercurrents that can exist beneath the surface of even the most seemingly idyllic communities. It highlights the vulnerability of young people in an increasingly connected world and the insidious ways in which predators can manipulate and exploit their victims. On October 15, 2021, police responded to a distress call from an apartment complex on Oak Street. What they discovered inside would haunt them for years to come: the lifeless body of 32-year-old Ethan Reed, a beloved local high school teacher, lying in a pool of his own blood. The prime suspect? His girlfriend of 2 years, 29-year-old software engineer Olivia Rogan. As investigators delved deeper into the case, they uncovered a disturbing web of surveillance, manipulation, and escalating control that had ensnared Ethan in the months leading up to his death. Hidden cameras, meticulously placed throughout his apartment, told a silent tale of paranoia and obsession. Olivia Rogan's path to becoming the central figure in a tragic true crime story began long before she met Ethan Reed. Born in 1993 to Margaret and James Rogan, Olivia grew up in a middle-class suburb of Portland. From an early age, those close to the family noted Olivia's intense need for attention and validation. Margaret Rogan, in an interview following her daughter's arrest, reflected on Olivia's childhood. She was an exceptionally bright child, always at the top of her class, but she struggled to form lasting friendships. Margaret recalled, "I thought it was just shyness at first, but as she got older I noticed how possessive she could be of the few friends she did make. If they spent time with other children, Olivia would become sullen and withdrawn." This pattern continued into Olivia's teenage years. Her high school boyfriend, Alex Chen, later told investigators about Olivia's constant need to know his whereabouts. "She would call or text incessantly when we weren't together," he said. "If I didn't respond quickly enough, she'd show up wherever she thought I might be." At the time, I thought it was just because she cared so much. Despite these interpersonal challenges, Olivia excelled academically. She graduated as valedictorian of her high school class and went on to study computer science at Stanford University. It was here that Olivia's controlling tendencies found a new outlet in the world of technology. Her college roommate, Sarah Jennings, remembered Olivia's fascination with coding and surveillance software. She was brilliant at it, Sarah said, but sometimes it felt like she was using her skills to keep tabs on everyone around her. She'd casually mention things about our classmates that she couldn't possibly have known without some kind of digital snooping. After graduating with honors, Olivia landed a prestigious job at a tech startup. Her colleagues described her as driven and meticulous, often working long hours to perfect her code. However, her personal life continued to be marked by tumultuous, short-lived relationships. Jason Tran, who dated Olivia for 6 months in 2019, described the relationship as intense and suffocating. "She wanted to know everything about my day, my thoughts, my plans," he said. "When I tried to set boundaries, she'd become angry or manipulative. It was exhausting." By the time Olivia moved back to Ashland in early 2020, accepting a remote position with her company, she had left a trail of broken relationships behind her. Yet those who knew her couldn't have predicted the dark turn her life would take when she met Ethan Reed. Ethan Reed's life stood in stark contrast to Olivia's tumultuous journey. Born in 1990 in Ashland, Ethan was the youngest of 3 children in a close-knit family. His older sister, Amanda Reed, described their childhood as idyllic. "We grew up surrounded by nature, spending our summers hiking in the mountains and our winters skiing. Ethan was always the peacemaker, the one who could make anyone laugh. From an early age, Ethan showed a passion for learning and a natural ability to connect with others." His high school English teacher, Mrs. Elaine Hoffman, remembered him fondly. "Ethan had a way of bringing out the best in his classmates. He was patient, kind, and had an infectious enthusiasm for literature. I always thought he'd make an excellent teacher someday." Mrs. Hoffman's prediction proved accurate. After graduating from the university with a degree in English literature, Ethan returned to his hometown to teach at Ashland High School. Ethan's personal life was characterized by steady, long-term relationships. His college girlfriend, Laura Simmons, remained a close friend even after their amicable breakup. "Ethan was always so balanced," she said. "He valued his independence, but was also incredibly loyal and supportive. We broke up because our career paths were taking us in different directions, but there was never any drama." The fateful meeting between Olivia Rogan and Ethan Reed occurred on a sunny Saturday afternoon in May 2020 at a local farmer's market. Olivia, still adjusting to life, had ventured out to explore her new surroundings. Ethan, a regular at the market, was picking up fresh produce for the week. Their eyes met across a display of organic apples, and Ethan, ever the friendly local, struck up a conversation about the best varieties for baking. Olivia, charmed by his easygoing nature and warm smile, found herself lingering at the stall far longer than she'd intended. As they chatted, they discovered a shared love of classic literature and hiking. Ethan, impressed by Olivia's quick wit and intelligence, suggested they meet up for a hike the following weekend. Olivia, feeling an instant connection, eagerly agreed. Their first date was a hike up to Grizzly Peak, offering breathtaking views of the Rogue Valley. Ethan's friend Mark later recalled, "Ethan came back from that hike on cloud 9. He couldn't stop talking about how smart and funny Olivia was, how they'd talked for hours without a lull in the conversation." Over the next few weeks, Olivia and Ethan's relationship blossomed rapidly. They spent long evenings discussing books, sharing meals, and exploring the natural beauty of southern area. To those around them, they seemed like a perfect match. However, even in these early honeymoon days of their relationship, there were subtle signs of Olivia's possessive nature. Ethan's sister Amanda noticed that Olivia seemed to monopolize his time. She'd call or text constantly when they weren't together, and she always seemed to have a reason why Ethan couldn't join family gatherings without her. Ethan, blinded by the excitement of new love, brushed off these early red flags. When his friend Mark expressed concern about the intensity of the relationship, Ethan laughed it off. "She's just excited about us," he said. "It'll calm down once we're more settled." Little did Ethan know that this was just the beginning of a pattern that would gradually tighten around him, slowly cutting him off from the life he had built and the people who cared about him most. By the fall of 2020, Olivia had all but moved into Ethan's apartment. Despite him never officially asking her to live with him, she began to exert influence over every aspect of his daily life, from what he ate to how he spent his free time. Ethan's colleague and friend, fellow English teacher Jessica Lawson, noticed changes in his behavior at work. He started turning down invitations to after-school happy hours, something he'd always enjoyed before. When I asked him about it, he said Olivia wasn't comfortable with him being out late, Jessica recalled. It seemed odd, given that she knew most of us and had even joined us a few times. Olivia's control extended to Ethan's social media presence. Friends noticed that his usually active Facebook and Instagram accounts became sparse, with posts becoming infrequent and impersonal. When questioned, Ethan would brush it off, saying he was trying to be more private online. But it was Olivia's attempts to isolate Ethan from his family that raised the most alarm bells. Amanda Reed remembered a particularly disturbing incident during the 2020 holiday season. "We always have a big family Christmas at our parents' house," she said. For that year, Ethan called at the last minute to say he and Olivia couldn't make it. When I pressed him, he said Olivia wasn't feeling well and he needed to stay with her. But I could hear her in the background, sounding perfectly fine. Olivia employed a variety of emotional manipulation tactics to maintain her grip on Ethan. She would oscillate between lavishing him with affection and subjecting him to cold, silent treatments if he didn't comply with her wishes. Ethan's friend Mark recounted a camping trip they had planned for months. "The night before we were supposed to leave, Ethan called to cancel. He sounded so defeated. He said Olivia was upset he was going away without her, even though she'd been invited and had declined. As 2021 progressed, Olivia's behavior became more erratic. She began accusing Ethan of infidelity, despite having no evidence to support her claims. She would show up unannounced at the high school, ostensibly to bring Ethan lunch. But colleagues noted how she seemed to be scanning the room, as if looking for signs of inappropriate behavior. Ethan's student Emma Chen later testified to a disturbing encounter. Ms. Rogan came into our classroom during lunch break. Mr. Reed wasn't there, but she stayed anyway, asking us questions about him. It felt really weird and invasive. Despite the mounting evidence of Olivia's controlling behavior, Ethan remained committed to the relationship. Those close to him noted his increasing stress and anxiety, but he would deflect their concerns, often making excuses for Olivia's actions. His sister Amanda confronted him directly in the summer of 2021. "I told him I was worried, that this didn't seem like a healthy relationship," she said. But he just got defensive. He said I didn't understand Olivia, that she'd been hurt in the past and needed extra reassurance. He truly believed he could help her overcome her insecurities. As Olivia's paranoia and need for control reached new heights, she made a decision that would irreversibly alter the course of her relationship with Ethan and ultimately lead to its tragic conclusion. In late August 2021, while Ethan was away at a weekend teaching conference, Olivia took the drastic step of installing hidden cameras throughout his apartment. The idea had been brewing in Olivia's mind for weeks. Her background in software engineering made the technical aspects of the plan feasible, and her growing suspicions about Ethan's fidelity provided the justification she needed to overcome any moral qualms. Olivia meticulously planned the operation, purchasing small high-definition cameras disguised as everyday objects, a smoke detector, a phone charger, even a potted plant. She also set up sophisticated software that would allow her to access the feeds remotely from her laptop or phone. On the Friday afternoon that Ethan left for his conference, Olivia sprang into action. She had a key to his apartment, ostensibly for emergencies, which gave her unfettered access. Over the next several hours, she carefully placed cameras in the living room, kitchen, bedroom, and even the bathroom, ensuring every corner of Ethan's private space was under surveillance. With the cameras in place and the software running smoothly, Olivia left the apartment, her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and guilt. She told herself that this was a necessary step, that it would allay her fears and allow her to trust Ethan completely. The first few days of monitoring proved uneventful. Olivia watched as Ethan went about his daily routines, grading papers, preparing lessons, chatting on the phone with his sister. But rather than easing her suspicions, the lack of incriminating evidence only fueled Olivia's paranoia. She began to obsess over minor details. Why did Ethan smile at that text message? Who was he waving to out the window? Olivia's colleague, David Cho, later recalled noticing changes in her behavior at work during this time. She seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone. I caught a glimpse of her screen once. It looked like a video feed, but she quickly closed it when she saw me looking. As the days turned into weeks, Olivia's obsession with the camera feeds grew. She began neglecting her work, her sleep suffered, and her interactions with Ethan became increasingly strained as she struggled to keep her secret. One evening, while reaching for a book on his shelf, Ethan noticed that several volumes were slightly out of place. He distinctly remembered organizing them just days before. In the bathroom, his toiletries seemed rearranged, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly how. More unsettling were the times he felt as if he was being watched. He'd be grading papers in the living room and suddenly feel a prickle on the back of his neck, as if someone's eyes were on him. But when he looked up, he was alone. Ethan's friend and fellow teacher, Jessica Lawson, recalled a conversation they had during this period. He mentioned feeling on edge in his own home, she said. He laughed it off, saying he was probably just stressed about work, but I could tell it was really bothering him. Olivia's behavior added to Ethan's growing discomfort. She began making comments about his daily activities that she shouldn't have known about. Once, she mentioned in passing that she liked the new brand of coffee he'd bought, despite not having been to his apartment in days. Another time, she asked about a phone call he'd had with his mother, though he was certain he hadn't mentioned it to her. When Ethan would express confusion about these slip-ups, Olivia would quickly change the subject or provide vague explanations. He must have mentioned the coffee in passing, she'd say, or perhaps his mother had told her about the call. As his unease grew, Ethan found himself second-guessing his own memories and perceptions. Am I just being paranoid? He wondered. Is the stress of work getting to me? Despite his attempts to rationalize the strange occurrences, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He began to pay closer attention to his surroundings, noting any changes or oddities in his apartment. He even considered confiding in his sister Amanda, but hesitated, worried that his suspicions might sound absurd or that he might be overreacting. The moment of revelation came on an October evening in 2021. Ethan had been grading papers late into the night, the soft glow of his laptop illuminating the living room. As he stretched and prepared to call it a night, his elbow knocked a small potted plant off the side table. The pot shattered on the hardwood floor, soil and ceramic shards scattering across the room. As Ethan knelt to clean up the mess, something caught his eye amidst the debris. A tiny lens, no bigger than a pencil eraser, glinted in the low light. His heart racing, Ethan carefully extracted the object from the soil. It was a miniature camera, expertly concealed within the plant's base. The discovery sent a chill down Ethan's spine. With trembling hands, he began a frantic search of his apartment. Over the next hour, he uncovered 5 more hidden cameras. In the smoke detector, a picture frame, even the shower head. The realization that his most private moments had been under surveillance was overwhelming. Ethan's mind reeled as he pieced together the implications. The strange comments Olivia had made, her uncanny knowledge of his daily activities, the feeling of being watched, it all suddenly made horrifying sense. The woman he had loved and trusted had violated his privacy in the most intimate way possible. In a daze, Ethan called the one person he knew he could trust implicitly, his sister Amanda. It was past midnight, but she answered on the second ring, immediately alert at the sound of distress in her brother's voice. "Ethan, what's wrong?" she asked, concern evident in her tone. Through a voice choked with emotion, Ethan recounted his discovery. Amanda listened in shocked silence, her initial disbelief quickly turning to anger on her brother's behalf. As Ethan's story unfolded, Amanda's protective instincts kicked in. "You need to get out of there," she insisted. "Pack a bag and come to my place. We'll figure this out together." But Ethan was torn. Part of him wanted to confront Olivia immediately, to demand answers and explanations. Another part was simply numb with betrayal, struggling to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with someone capable of such a gross invasion of privacy. In the end, it was Amanda's steady voice that guided his next actions. "Document everything," she advised. "Take pictures of the cameras. Save any recordings you can find. We'll go to the police in the morning." As the first light of dawn broke over Ashland, Ethan sat on his couch, surrounded by the dismantled remains of Olivia's surveillance network. His phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Good morning, babe. Sleep well?" The irony of her feigned normalcy was not lost on Ethan. With a deep breath, he typed out a response that would set in motion the final tragic act of their relationship. "We need to talk. Come over as soon as you can." The tension in Ethan's apartment was palpable as Olivia arrived later that morning. She entered with her usual smile, leaning in for a kiss but froze when she saw Ethan's grim expression and the array of dismantled cameras on the coffee table. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then Olivia's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. "Ethan, I can explain," she began, her voice quavering. But Ethan, his voice low and controlled, cut her off. He spoke of trust betrayed, of the sanctity of privacy violated. With each word, Olivia seemed to shrink, her usual confidence evaporating in the face of her exposed deception. When Ethan finally fell silent, Olivia launched into a desperate justification of her actions. She spoke of her deep-seated insecurities, her fear of losing him, her conviction that if she could just prove to herself that he was faithful, she could finally relax into their relationship. Her words came out in a rush, pleading and explanatory, but Ethan remained unmoved. "I can't be with someone who would do this," he said firmly. "We're done, Olivia. I want you to leave." Olivia's demeanor changed in an instant. Her tears dried up, replaced by a cold, hard look. "You can't do this to me," she hissed. "We're perfect together. You're overreacting." As Ethan stood firm in his decision, Olivia's pleas turned to threats. She spoke of ruining his career, of telling his students and colleagues about embarrassing moments she'd captured on camera. When these threats failed to sway Ethan, she resorted to emotional manipulation, threatening self-harm if he left her. Throughout it all, Ethan remained resolute. Even as his heart broke at the sight of Olivia's desperation, he knew with a clarity that surprised him that there was no coming back from this betrayal. Finally, seeing that her words were having no effect, Olivia stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind her. Ethan sank onto the couch, emotionally exhausted. He thought the worst was over. He had no idea that Olivia's desperation was about to take a far more dangerous turn. The events of October 15th, 2021, would forever be etched in the memories of Ashland's residents. The day began like any other, with no indication of the tragedy that would unfold. Ethan, emotionally drained from the confrontation with Olivia, had called in sick to work. He spent the morning talking with his sister Amanda, making plans to file a police report about the hidden cameras. As evening approached, he decided to take a walk to clear his head, leaving his phone behind to avoid any desperate messages from Olivia. It was during this absence that Olivia made her final fatal return to Ethan's apartment. Neighbors would later report seeing her enter the building, her face set in a mask of determination. She used her key to let herself in, her mind racing with a mix of anger, desperation, and a twisted sense of righteous indignation. When Ethan returned home around 7 p.m., he found Olivia waiting for him in the darkened living room. The sight of her there, uninvited and unexpected, sent a jolt of fear through him. "Olivia, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice wary. Olivia's response was chilling in its calmness. "We're going to fix this, Ethan," she said. "You'll see that we belong together." What followed was a heated argument that quickly spiraled out of control. Olivia vacillated between pleading for another chance and lashing out with bitter accusations. Ethan, his patience exhausted, demanded that she leave immediately. It was then that Olivia's fragile control snapped. In a move that would shock even those who knew of her obsessive tendencies, she produced a kitchen knife she had taken from Ethan's own drawer. The next few moments were a blur of violence and terror. Ethan, caught off guard by the sudden escalation, tried to reason with Olivia, even as he backed away from the blade. But Olivia, beyond the reach of reason, lunged forward. In the struggle that ensued, Ethan's training as a former high school wrestler came into play. He managed to grapple with Olivia, trying to disarm her without causing harm. But in her frenzied state, Olivia's strength seemed superhuman. Neighbors would later report hearing shouts and the sound of breaking glass. One, concerned by the commotion, called 911, but help would arrive too late. By the time police broke down the door of Ethan's apartment, the tragic scene had already played out to its grim conclusion. They found Ethan on the floor with multiple stab wounds marking his body, the life already fading from his eyes. Olivia sat beside him, the bloody knife still clutched in her hand, her gaze vacant as she stared at what she had done. As paramedics rushed in, futilely attempting to save Ethan's life, Olivia offered no resistance when the police took her into custody. Her only words, repeated over and over like a mantra, were, "He was supposed to love me forever." The investigation, led by Detective Sarah Nguyen of the Ashland Police Department, quickly uncovered the full extent of Olivia's surveillance operation, revealing months of invasive monitoring. This digital trail, along with physical evidence from the crime scene and witness statements, painted a damning picture of obsession and premeditated violence. Ethan's family and friends were devastated. His sister Amanda, in particular, struggled with guilt. "I knew something was wrong," she said in a tearful interview. "I should have pushed harder, done more to get him away from her." As the investigation progressed, more details of Olivia's troubled past came to light. Former colleagues and ex-boyfriends came forward with stories of her controlling behavior and emotional manipulation. Her parents, shell-shocked by their daughter's actions, could only offer tearful apologies to Ethan's family. The district attorney presented a methodical case, walking the jury through the progression of Olivia's obsessive behavior. The recovered surveillance footage played a central role, starkly illustrating the invasion of Ethan's privacy. The defense didn't contest the basic facts of the case. Instead, they focused on Olivia's mental state, bringing in expert witnesses to testify about her history of attachment issues and borderline personality disorder. They argued that Olivia's actions were the result of a mental health crisis, not premeditated murder. Olivia herself took the stand, her testimony an unsettling mixture of remorse and rationalization. She spoke of her deep love for Ethan and her fear of abandonment, claiming that she never meant to hurt him. Her apparent lack of full comprehension of the gravity of her actions left many in the courtroom disturbed. After a 2-week trial and 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder. At the sentencing hearing, the judge delivered a scathing indictment of Olivia's actions before sentencing her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Ashlyn slowly healed, the community was left to reflect on the nature of love, trust, and the human capacity for both compassion and cruelty. The case would be remembered not just for its shocking conclusion, but as a catalyst for change and a somber reminder of the importance of recognizing and addressing toxic relationship dynamics before they escalate to tragedy. Emily Parker was born and raised in the quiet town of Maplewood, Ohio. Her parents, Richard and Ann Parker, were well-respected members of the community. Richard owned a local hardware store, while Ann was a nurse at the nearby hospital. Emily, the middle child with an older brother, Jack, and a younger sister, Sarah, was the apple of her parents' eyes. From an early age, Emily exhibited a zest for life. She was an exceptional student, excelling in her studies and participating in various extracurricular activities. Her passion for teaching emerged during her high school years, inspired by a history teacher who brought the past to life in vivid detail. Emily pursued her dream by attending Ohio State University, where she earned her degree in education. After college, Emily returned to Maplewood and secured a teaching position at the local elementary school. Her dedication to her students was unparalleled. She often stayed late to help with after-school programs and tutored struggling students on weekends. Her colleagues admired her enthusiasm, and parents often requested her for their children's classes. Outside of her professional life, Emily had a wide range of interests. She loved hiking, photography, and reading historical novels. Her weekends were often spent exploring nature trails or curled up with a good book. Friends described her as warm, compassionate, and always ready to lend a helping hand. Emily met David Reynolds at a friend's wedding. He was charming, with a quick wit and an easy smile. David, a financial consultant from New York City, was visiting for the wedding. The attraction was immediate, and their whirlwind romance took everyone by surprise. David lavished Emily with attention, expensive gifts, and exotic trips. Their courtship was brief but intense, and within a year David proposed. Emily, swept off her feet by his charisma and the promise of a glamorous life, said yes. Her family and friends had mixed feelings about the rapid engagement. While they wanted to support Emily's happiness, they couldn't shake a sense of unease about David. He was always impeccably dressed, driving luxury cars and staying in upscale hotels, but his extravagant lifestyle seemed at odds with his modest background. Emily, however, was enamored and reassured everyone that David was her soulmate. Their wedding was a grand affair, held in a picturesque vineyard and attended by over 200 guests. Emily's friends from Maplewood and David's associates from New York mingled under fairy lights and sipped champagne, celebrating the union. As the newlyweds departed for their honeymoon in St. Lucia, no one could have predicted the dark turn their love story would take. David Reynolds was born and raised in Queens, New York. His parents, Thomas and Margaret Reynolds, struggled to make ends meet. Thomas worked as a mechanic, while Margaret held various part-time jobs to support their 3 children. David, the eldest, grew up with a strong drive to escape the financial hardships of his upbringing. From a young age, David exhibited a knack for numbers and a shrewd understanding of money. He excelled in school, earning a scholarship to New York University where he studied finance. David's ambition was evident. He spent his college years networking and securing internships at prestigious firms. His relentless work ethic paid off, and upon graduation, he landed a coveted position at a top financial consultancy. David quickly rose through the ranks, his talent for investment strategies and financial planning earning him a reputation as a rising star. His success afforded him a lifestyle he had always dreamed of: designer suits, high-end cars, and a luxury apartment in Manhattan. However, his professional success masked deeper issues. Colleagues often described David as charming but ruthless, willing to bend the rules to achieve his goals. David's personal life was equally complex. His charm attracted many women, but his relationships were often short-lived. He had a series of high-profile romances, each ending abruptly amid rumors of infidelity and deceit. Despite this, he maintained a polished public image, carefully curating his social media to portray a life of sophistication and success. When David met Emily Parker, she represented something different. Her genuine warmth and small-town innocence were a stark contrast to the superficial relationships he was accustomed to. To his friends, it seemed like David was truly in love for the first time. But as their relationship progressed, cracks began to appear. David's financial empire was not as solid as it seemed. Behind the scenes, he was entangled in risky investments and mounting debts. David's financial troubles were compounded by his extravagant spending habits. He kept these issues hidden from Emily, presenting only the image of a successful and devoted partner. His decision to propose was as much about securing a future with Emily as it was about seeking stability amid his growing financial chaos. Their wedding, though a joyous occasion, also marked the point where David's deceptions began to catch up with him. St. Lucia, with its lush landscapes and serene beaches, was the perfect backdrop for David and Emily's honeymoon. They stayed at an exclusive resort, their bungalow perched on the edge of a secluded cove. The first few days were filled with romantic dinners, sunset walks, and excursions to explore the island's natural beauty. Emily documented their adventures on social media, her posts filled with joy and excitement. On the night of Emily's disappearance, the couple dined at the resort's beachfront restaurant. The atmosphere was idyllic. Soft music played in the background, and tiki torches flickered in the gentle breeze. Fellow diners noticed the couple laughing and holding hands, seemingly in love. The staff, accustomed to honeymooners, paid them little special attention. After dinner, David suggested a moonlit walk along the beach. Emily, always one for romance, readily agreed. They strolled along the water's edge, the sound of the waves mingling with their conversation. David later recounted that Emily had expressed a desire to take a swim. She slipped off her sandals and waded into the water, the moonlight casting a silver glow on her figure. According to David, he returned to their bungalow to fetch a jacket for Emily. When he came back, she was gone. Panic set in as he searched the beach, calling her name. He alerted the resort staff, who joined the search, but Emily was nowhere to be found. David's distress seemed genuine as he spoke with the resort's manager, his voice cracking and hands trembling. The following morning, the local police were notified. They began an immediate investigation, questioning resort staff and guests. Divers searched the waters near the beach, and sniffer dogs were brought in to track any scent that might lead to Emily. Despite their efforts, no clues emerged. The beach was combed for any personal items, but nothing was found. As the hours turned into days, David's behavior began to attract scrutiny. He appeared genuinely distraught, but there were moments when his composure seemed forced. The police noted his meticulous recounting of events, almost as if rehearsed. Resort staff mentioned his insistence on calling his lawyer soon after Emily's disappearance, which struck them as odd. Witnesses provided conflicting accounts. Some recalled seeing the couple arguing earlier in the day, while others described them as affectionate. A few guests reported hearing raised voices from their bungalow the night before Emily vanished. The police were left with a puzzling mix of evidence and testimonies that painted an inconsistent picture of the couple's final hours together. As the investigation stalled, David's narrative was the only story available. His plea for information was broadcast on news networks, his tearful face becoming the public image of a grieving husband. Yet behind the scenes, Detective Hayes was piecing together a different story, one that hinted at a more sinister truth. Detective Hayes arrived at the resort, greeted by the tropical heat and the sight of tourists enjoying their vacations, seemingly unaware of the drama unfolding. His first step was to interview David Reynolds. Sitting across from him in the resort's lounge, Hayes observed David's demeanor carefully. The man seemed genuinely distraught, but there was an underlying tension that the seasoned detective couldn't ignore. David recounted the events of the night Emily disappeared, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a flicker of anxiety. Hayes listened intently, asking pointed questions about their activities, their relationship, and any possible reasons Emily might have had to leave suddenly. David's answers were consistent, but Hayes felt they were too polished, as if rehearsed. The detective then spoke with the resort staff and other guests. The accounts varied, some aligning with David's story while others contradicted it. A waitress at the restaurant mentioned that David seemed agitated during dinner, frequently checking his phone. A couple staying in a neighboring bungalow reported hearing an argument late at night, although they couldn't make out the words. Hayes' team searched the couple's bungalow and the surrounding area. They found Emily's belongings neatly packed, her passport and wallet untouched. Her phone was missing, presumably with her. A thorough examination of the beach yielded no new clues. The tide and weather had likely washed away any trace evidence. As the days passed, the investigation broadened. Hayes looked into David's background, finding a man who was both successful and secretive. His financial records revealed a troubling pattern. Despite his high-paying job, David was deep in debt. Large withdrawals from his accounts suggested a gambling problem, and several investments had failed spectacularly. Hayes interviewed David's colleagues and friends in New York, uncovering a different side of him. They described David as charming but unreliable, with a penchant for risky ventures and a history of romantic entanglements. One colleague, who requested anonymity, mentioned that David had recently been involved in a scandal at work, hinting at financial misconduct. The detectives' team also analyzed phone records and bank statements, uncovering a web of transactions that pointed to financial distress. Several large transfers had been made to offshore accounts, and David had taken out substantial loans shortly before the wedding. These findings suggested that David was far from the affluent figure he portrayed. As suspicion around David grew, the investigation took a dramatic turn with the discovery of a letter in Emily's handwriting, found hidden in her suitcase. It was addressed to her parents and hinted at her growing unease about David. She wrote about discovering discrepancies in his stories and financial dealings, expressing fear that she had made a terrible mistake in marrying him. The evidence was mounting, and Detective Hayes felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together. But without Emily, the case remained frustratingly incomplete. The detective was determined to uncover the truth, knowing that the facade of the perfect honeymoon was hiding something far more sinister. The financial investigation into David Reynolds' affairs revealed a cascade of deceit. Detective Hayes and his team uncovered a complex network of bank accounts, hidden assets, and dubious transactions. David's financial empire, once thought to be thriving, was crumbling under the weight of risky investments and substantial debts. As Hayes delved deeper, he discovered that David had been involved in several questionable business ventures. One such venture was a failed real estate development in Florida, which had resulted in significant losses for investors. Another was a tech startup that went bankrupt, leaving David with substantial debts. These ventures, combined with his gambling habits, had drained his resources and left him in a precarious financial position. David's secret debts and business failures provided a possible motive for foul play. With Emily's disappearance, questions arose about potential life insurance policies or other financial benefits he might gain. Hayes' team found that David had recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Emily, raising further suspicions. Testimonies from friends and colleagues about David's character began to form a consistent narrative. They described him as someone who would do anything to maintain his image of success, even if it meant deceiving those closest to him. Emily, it seemed, had been drawn into a web of lies and financial manipulation. The mounting evidence suggested that David's involvement in Emily's disappearance was more than just circumstantial. His financial desperation, coupled with the inconsistencies in his story, pointed to a more sinister motive. As the investigation continued, Detective Hayes knew that the key to solving the case lay in uncovering the full extent of David's deceit and the secrets he had worked so hard to conceal. As the investigation deepened, another layer of David Reynolds's double life began to unfold. His extramarital affairs. Detectives uncovered a series of clandestine relationships that painted a picture of a man far different from the devoted husband he appeared to be. David's phone records and emails revealed communications with several women, some of whom he had met through his business dealings, while others were casual encounters. These relationships ranged from fleeting flings to more serious entanglements. Detective Hayes and his team meticulously tracked down and interviewed these women, each conversation revealing more about David's deceptive nature. One of the women, Laura Mitchell, a marketing executive from New York, provided crucial insight. She described her relationship with David as passionate but tumultuous. They had met at a conference a year before his wedding, and their affair continued well into his engagement with Emily. Laura was unaware of David's upcoming marriage until she saw the wedding announcement on social media. Feeling betrayed, she ended their relationship but kept records of their communications, which she willingly shared with the investigators. Another woman, Jessica Evans, a real estate agent from Miami, had a similar story. She and David had met during one of his business trips, and their affair was marked by lavish gifts and extravagant promises. Jessica, too, was in the dark about David's marital status. She described him as attentive and affectionate, but noted his tendency to vanish for days without explanation. The most damning testimony came from Rachel Turner, a colleague from his firm who had been involved with David for nearly 2 years. Rachel's account revealed a pattern of manipulation and deceit. She recounted how David had confided in her about his financial troubles, painting himself as a victim of unfortunate circumstances. Rachel, deeply infatuated with him, had even loaned him money on several occasions, believing his promises to repay her once his investments paid off. These revelations had a profound impact on the case. They not only established a pattern of deceit, but also suggested potential motives for Emily's disappearance. David's affairs indicated a man capable of maintaining multiple lives, each carefully compartmentalized to prevent discovery. His ability to juggle these relationships while hiding his financial troubles from Emily spoke to his skill at deception. Interviews with his past lovers painted a picture of a man driven by a need for validation and material success. They described how David would often speak of his ambitions and dreams, using his charm to elicit sympathy and support. His relationships, both romantic and financial, were tools he used to navigate his increasingly precarious life. The impact of these revelations on the case was significant. They provided a motive for foul play, suggesting that David might have seen Emily as both an obstacle and a solution to his problems. With his financial empire collapsing and his web of lies unraveling, the pressure on David had reached a breaking point. Emily's disappearance and the subsequent focus on David threatened to expose his entire charade. As Detective Hayes pieced together the evidence, it became clear that the investigation was far from straightforward. Each new discovery added complexity to the case, revealing the depths of David's deceit and the lengths he was willing to go to maintain his facade. The true challenge lay in proving his involvement beyond doubt, a task that required uncovering every hidden aspect of his life. Just when Detective Hayes believed he had a clear picture of David Reynolds' involvement in Emily's disappearance, a shocking twist emerged. A mysterious figure, previously unknown to the investigation, came forward with information that turned the case on its head. The figure was a man named Alex Carter, a private investigator from New York. Alex contacted Detective Hayes, claiming to have crucial information about David Reynolds and his activities. Intrigued and cautious, Hayes arranged a meeting. In a dimly lit cafe, Alex revealed his connection to the case. Alex explained that he had been hired by an anonymous client to investigate David Reynolds months before Emily's disappearance. His client had suspected David of financial misconduct and infidelity, and Alex's investigation had uncovered significant evidence of both. He had been tracking David's movements and communications, documenting his secret affairs and shady business dealings. But Alex's most startling revelation was about Emily. According to his findings, Emily had discovered David's infidelity and financial troubles shortly before their wedding. She had confided in a close friend, expressing her doubts and fears about marrying David. This friend, concerned for Emily's safety, had anonymously hired Alex to gather evidence, hoping to give Emily a way out of her situation. Alex provided Detective Hayes with a dossier of his findings, including photographs, financial records, and transcripts of conversations. One particularly damning piece of evidence was a recording of a conversation between David and an unknown associate discussing plans that hinted at foul play. The recording suggested that David had been plotting something sinister, although the details were vague. This new information complicated the case significantly. It introduced the possibility that Emily might have been aware of David's plans and had taken steps to protect herself. Detective Hayes considered the idea that Emily could have staged her disappearance to escape David's clutches, although the lack of concrete evidence made this theory difficult to prove. Hayes decided to re-interview everyone involved, armed with the new information. He spoke again with Emily's family and friends, uncovering more details about her state of mind before the wedding. Emily's best friend, Lisa, revealed that Emily had been increasingly anxious in the weeks leading up to the honeymoon. She had confided in Lisa about her fears and mentioned the anonymous tipster who had warned her about David. David's reaction to the reopened investigation was one of surprise and agitation. He denied any involvement in Emily's disappearance and dismissed the evidence provided by Alex Carter as fabrications. However, his growing frustration and inconsistent statements only added to the suspicion surrounding him. The twist in the case forced Detective Hayes to consider all possibilities. He intensified the search for Emily, exploring the idea that she might have gone into hiding. The investigation expanded to include airports, border crossings, and potential safe houses. The media coverage, once focused solely on David, began to speculate about Emily's fate and her possible role in the unfolding drama. As the investigation continued, Detective Hayes faced mounting pressure to solve the case. The new information from Alex Carter provided valuable leads, but it also complicated the narrative, making it harder to distinguish between victim and perpetrator. Hayes knew that the truth lay somewhere within the tangled web of deceit and betrayal, and he was determined to unravel it. The investigation into Emily Parker's disappearance stretched on for months, with Detective Hayes and his team following every lead, no matter how tenuous. The case had become a national obsession, with the media closely monitoring every development. Public opinion was divided. Some believed David Reynolds was guilty of foul play, while others speculated that Emily had staged her own disappearance to escape a troubled marriage. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A hiker in a remote part of St. Lucia discovered a makeshift campsite hidden in the dense jungle. Among the belongings were items that matched the descriptions of Emily's possessions, including a distinctive bracelet she was known to wear. The discovery reignited the investigation, with search teams scouring the area for further clues. Eventually, they found Emily. She was alive but severely dehydrated and disoriented. Emily had indeed staged her disappearance, driven by fear and desperation, after uncovering David's deceit and feeling trapped in the marriage. She had fled into the jungle, intending to disappear entirely, but the harsh conditions had taken a toll on her health. Emily's rescue brought a mix of relief and outrage. While many were glad she was safe, questions about her actions and the trauma she endured dominated the public discourse. Detective Hayes interviewed Emily extensively, piecing together her story. She described the mounting pressure she felt after discovering David's infidelities and financial troubles. The anonymous tip from Alex Carter had been the final straw, prompting her to take drastic action. David Reynolds was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit harm. The evidence provided by Alex Carter, combined with Emily's testimony, built a strong case against him. During the trial, the full extent of David's deceit was laid bare. His financial empire had been a house of cards, supported by lies and illegal activities. The jury found him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The aftermath of the case left lasting scars on everyone involved. Emily returned to Maplewood, where she began the long process of healing with the support of her family and friends. She became an advocate for domestic abuse victims, sharing her story to help others in similar situations. The media's fascination with her life eventually faded, but Emily remained a symbol of resilience and survival. Detective Hayes reflected on the case as one of the most challenging of his career. It had been a journey through layers of deception and human frailty, revealing the dark complexities of love, trust, and betrayal. The resolution, while not entirely satisfying, brought a measure of justice and closure to those affected. In the end, the case of Emily Parker's disappearance was a stark reminder that truth can be stranger than fiction, and that beneath the surface of seemingly perfect lives, there can lie a twisted web of secrets waiting to be uncovered. In the quiet suburb of Millbrook, nestled just outside the bustling city of Hartford, Connecticut, a heinous crime shattered the illusion of peaceful suburban life. On a crisp autumn morning in September 2018, the body of 17-year-old Sarah Thompson was discovered in the woods behind her family's home. The gruesome scene sent shockwaves through the community, leaving residents locked behind their doors and whispering about the killer who walked among them. Detective Michael Carter, a seasoned investigator with the Hartford Police Department, was called to lead the case. With his sharp intuition and unwavering dedication, Carter delved into the intricate web of lies and deceit surrounding Sarah's murder. Little did he know that this case would challenge his perceptions and force him to confront the darkest aspects of human nature. As the investigation unfolded, suspicion initially fell on Sarah's stepmother, Amanda Wilson. The troubled relationship between the two had been no secret to their neighbors, and Amanda's apparent jealousy of her stepdaughter seemed to provide a motive. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly straightforward case lay a twisted tale of betrayal, secrets, and fatal consequences. At the center of this tragedy stood Robert Wilson, Sarah's stepfather. A respected businessman and pillar of the community, Robert appeared to be the grieving father figure, supporting his wife through their shared loss. But as Detective Carter would soon discover, Robert's carefully constructed facade concealed a web of lies that would ultimately lead to his downfall. This is the story of a murder that tore apart a family, challenged a detective's instincts, and revealed the devastating consequences of unchecked desire and betrayal. It serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous predators are hiding in plain sight, wearing the mask of normalcy in our very own neighborhoods. Sarah Thompson was a vibrant and promising young woman whose life was cut tragically short just weeks before her 18th birthday. Born to single mother Amanda Thompson in 2001, Sarah grew up as a bright and curious child, always eager to learn and explore the world around her. From an early age, Sarah showed a passion for art and literature. Her teachers often praised her creativity and insightful essays, marking her as a student with great potential. Sarah's artwork adorned the walls of her high school, and she had recently begun to explore photography, capturing the beauty of nature in the woods behind her home, the same woods that would ultimately become the site of her untimely death. Despite her academic and artistic achievements, Sarah's home life was far from perfect. When she was 12, her mother married Robert Wilson, a successful local businessman. While Sarah initially welcomed the stability Robert brought to their lives, the relationship between stepdaughter and stepfather grew increasingly strained as Sarah entered her teenage years. Friends and classmates described Sarah as kind-hearted, but fiercely independent. She had a small, tight-knit group of friends and was known for standing up against bullying in school. Her best friend, Emily Chen, recalled Sarah's dream of studying journalism at NYU, aspiring to become an investigative reporter and uncover truths hidden beneath the surface. Sarah's relationship with her mother, Amanda, had always been complex. As an only child, Sarah had been the center of Amanda's world for years. However, the arrival of Robert in their lives created a shift in dynamics. Sarah often felt that her mother prioritized her new marriage over their mother-daughter bond, leading to frequent arguments and emotional distance. In the months leading up to her death, those close to Sarah noticed a change in her demeanor. She became more withdrawn, spending increased time alone in her room or wandering in the woods with her camera. Her art took on darker themes, and her usually meticulous schoolwork began to slip. Emily remembered Sarah seeming distracted and worried, but when pressed, Sarah would brush off concerns with a forced smile and a change of subject. What no one knew at the time was that Sarah had stumbled upon a secret that would prove fatal. In her quest for truth and her natural curiosity, She had uncovered something that someone was willing to kill to keep hidden. Sarah Thompson's young life, full of promise and potential, was snuffed out just as she stood on the threshold of adulthood, leaving behind a community in mourning and a mystery that would shake Millbrook to its core. Robert Wilson, age 45 at the time of Sarah's murder, presented himself as the epitome of suburban success. A charismatic and well-respected financial advisor, Robert had built a thriving practice in Hartford, managing the wealth of some of the city's most affluent residents. His polished appearance and confident demeanor made him a natural leader in the community, serving on the local Chamber of Commerce and coaching youth soccer. Born and raised in a working-class family in Boston, Robert had clawed his way up the social ladder through a combination of charm, intelligence, and ruthless ambition. He met Amanda Thompson at a charity gala in 2012, and their whirlwind romance culminated in marriage just 8 months later. To the outside world, Robert appeared to be the perfect husband and stepfather, providing stability and financial security to Amanda and Sarah. However, beneath the veneer of success and respectability, Robert harbored dark secrets and unfulfilled desires. His marriage to Amanda had quickly lost its luster, and he found himself drawn to the excitement of an illicit affair. For the past year, Robert had been involved in a passionate relationship with Elena Gonzalez, the wife of his next-door neighbor and close friend David. Robert's affair with Elena was more than just a physical attraction. He felt truly alive in her presence, experiencing a connection he believed he had never shared with Amanda. The two lovers would meet in secret, stealing moments of passion while their spouses were at work or running errands. Robert became expert at lying and manipulating those around him to maintain his double life. As Sarah entered her late teens, Robert found himself increasingly uncomfortable in her presence. Her perceptive nature and keen eye for detail made him paranoid that she might uncover his infidelity. He began to avoid spending time alone with his stepdaughter, making excuses to miss family dinners and events. Friends and colleagues described Robert as charming and generous, always ready with a joke or a helping hand. David Gonzalez, unaware of Robert's betrayal, often praised him as the best neighbor and friend a man could ask for. Robert's clients trusted him implicitly, drawn in by his confident assurances and impressive track record. Yet those who knew Robert best sensed an underlying current of discontent. His assistant at the financial firm noted his increased irritability and distraction in the months leading up to Sarah's death. Robert's longtime friend from college, Mark Stevens, observed that Robert seemed to be living on edge, as if constantly looking over his shoulder. Little did anyone suspect that behind Robert Wilson's carefully crafted image lay a man capable of unspeakable acts, driven by desperation to protect his secrets and preserve his way of life at any cost. The grisly discovery was made on the morning of September 15, 2018, by a jogger on his usual trail through the woods behind the Wilson residence. The body of Sarah Thompson lay partially concealed beneath a pile of leaves and branches, a crude attempt at concealment that did little to hide the horrific nature of the crime. Detective Michael Carter arrived on the scene within the hour, his experienced eye taking in every detail. Sarah's body showed signs of a violent struggle. Bruises marred her arms and face, and defensive wounds on her hands indicated she had fought desperately for her life. The cause of death was immediately apparent, a jagged wound across her throat, likely inflicted with a serrated blade. As the forensics team combed the area for evidence, Carter noted several key details. Sarah's camera, which friends claimed she always carried on her woodland excursions, was missing. Drag marks and disturbed vegetation suggested the body had been moved from the initial site of the attack, possibly in an attempt to hide it from immediate discovery. Perhaps most tellingly, there were no signs of sexual assault, leading Carter to suspect that the motive for the murder was personal rather than opportunistic. The brutality of the attack pointed to a crime of passion. Someone who knew Sarah and had been driven to a moment of uncontrollable rage. As news of the murder spread, the once peaceful community of Millbrook descended into a state of fear and suspicion. Neighbors who had previously left their doors unlocked now double-checked their security systems. Parents kept their children indoors, and the woods that had once been a place of recreation became a no-go zone, cordoned off with yellow police tape. Detective Michael Carter, a 20-year veteran of the Hartford Police Department, took charge of the investigation with a grim determination. Known for his meticulous approach and uncanny ability to see connections others missed, Carter had solved some of the department's most challenging cases. As he stood in the Wilsons' living room, surveying the family photos on the mantel, he knew this case would test him like never before. The first 48 hours of the investigation were a whirlwind of activity. Carter and his team conducted initial interviews with family members, friends, and neighbors. Sarah's school records were examined, her social media account scrutinized, and her movements in the days leading up to her death were painstakingly reconstructed. Robert Wilson, appearing shell-shocked, provided a detailed account of his whereabouts on the night of the murder. He claimed to have been working late at his office, a fact corroborated by security footage and his assistant's testimony. Amanda Wilson, still visibly distraught, struggled to maintain composure during her interview. She admitted to having argued with Sarah the afternoon before her disappearance, but insisted it was just typical mother-daughter friction. As Carter delved deeper, a picture began to emerge of a household fraught with tension. Neighbors spoke of frequent arguments between Sarah and her mother, their raised voices often carrying across manicured lawns. Sarah's best friend, Emily Chen, revealed that Sarah had been increasingly unhappy at home, feeling trapped and misunderstood. The forensics team's initial findings provided more questions than answers. Trace evidence found on Sarah's clothing didn't match samples taken from Robert or Amanda. The murder weapon, likely a hunting knife or similar serrated blade, was nowhere to be found despite an extensive search of the Wilson property and surrounding areas. A breakthrough came when Carter interviewed Elena Gonzalez, the Wilsons' next-door neighbor. Elena, visibly nervous during the interview, mentioned that she had seen Sarah arguing with Amanda in the driveway the day before her disappearance. More intriguingly, Elena let slip that Amanda had always seemed jealous of her daughter's youth and beauty. This information, combined with the tumultuous home environment and Amanda's shaky alibi for the night of the murder, led Carter to focus his attention on Sarah's mother. He theorized that years of resentment had finally boiled over, resulting in a confrontation that turned deadly. As the investigation entered its second week, Carter felt confident they were on the right track. He obtained a warrant to search Amanda's personal belongings and communications, hoping to find the crucial piece of evidence that would break the case wide open. However, a nagging doubt lingered in the back of Carter's mind. Something about Robert Wilson's calm demeanor and perfect alibi struck him as too neat, too convenient. Little did Carter know that his instincts were leading him toward a truth far more sinister than he could have imagined. As the investigation progressed, all signs seemed to point toward Amanda Wilson as the prime suspect of her daughter's murder. Detective Carter, driven by the evidence at hand, began to build a case against the 42-year-old homemaker with a troubled past. Carter's team uncovered a series of heated text exchanges between Amanda and Sarah in the weeks leading up to the murder. In one particularly vicious argument, Amanda accused Sarah of trying to sabotage her marriage, while Sarah fired back, calling her mother a pathetic, jealous old woman. These digital breadcrumbs seemed to support the theory of a family dynamic that had reached a breaking point. Further fueling suspicion was Amanda's behavior in the aftermath of Sarah's death. While initially distraught, she quickly became defensive and evasive during questioning. Her alibi for the night of the murder was weak. She claimed to have been home alone, watching television with no one to corroborate her story. A search of the Wilson home uncovered a journal hidden in Amanda's bedside table. Entries detailed her growing resentment toward Sarah, lamenting the girl's beauty and the attention she received from Robert. One disturbing passage read, "Sometimes I wish she would just disappear. Our lives would be so much better without her constant presence, her judging eyes." The case against Amanda seemed to strengthen when a neighbor reported seeing her return home in the early hours of the morning on the day Sarah's body was discovered. Amanda had no explanation for this late-night excursion, claiming she must have been sleepwalking, a condition she had never mentioned before. As circumstantial evidence mounted, Carter felt increasing pressure from his superiors and the media to make an arrest. The community, gripped by fear, demanded justice for Sarah. Amanda Wilson, once a sympathetic figure, became the target of public hatred and suspicion. Carter, despite his growing certainty of Amanda's guilt, couldn't shake a lingering doubt. Something about her desperation and fear during interrogations didn't align with the calculated killer he believed had committed this crime. Nevertheless, with the evidence at hand, he prepared to make an arrest. On a rainy Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Sarah's body was found, Amanda Wilson was taken into custody. As she was led from her home in handcuffs, she protested her innocence, her cries echoing through the stunned neighborhood. Robert Wilson watched from the doorway, his face an unreadable mask as his wife was placed in the back of a police cruiser. Little did Carter know that in his pursuit of justice, he had fallen for a brilliantly orchestrated misdirection, leaving the true killer free to cover his tracks. The case against Amanda Wilson seemed airtight, but Detective Michael Carter couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. It was a small detail, easily overlooked, that finally set him on the path to the truth. While reviewing security footage from businesses near the Wilson home, Carter noticed Robert's car leaving his office parking lot much earlier than he had claimed on the night of the murder. Intrigued by this discrepancy, Carter decided to dig deeper into Robert Wilson's life. He re-interviewed Robert's colleagues and clients, paying closer attention to the man's movements and relationships. It was during a conversation with Robert's assistant that Carter stumbled upon a crucial piece of information. Robert had been making frequent, unexplained trips to a coffee shop across town, always during his lunch break. Surveillance of the coffee shop revealed a startling discovery. Robert was meeting regularly with Elena Gonzalez, his neighbor's wife. The two displayed an intimacy that went far beyond friendly neighborly interactions. Carter had uncovered Robert's secret affair. With this new information, Carter approached Elena for another interview. Confronted with evidence of the affair, Elena broke down, revealing the extent of her relationship with Robert. They had been involved for over a year, stealing moments together whenever they could. Elena, racked with guilt, admitted that she had lied in her previous statement to protect Robert. The affair cast Robert's alibi for the night of the murder in a new light. Elena confirmed that they had indeed met that evening, contradicting Robert's claim of working late. This revelation shattered the carefully constructed timeline Robert had provided. As Carter delved further into the relationship between Robert and Elena, he uncovered a web of lies and secret rendezvous. Bank records showed Robert had recently inquired about transferring large sums of money offshore. Email exchanges hinted at plans for a new life together, away from their spouses and responsibilities. The detective now faced a troubling question. Could Robert Wilson, the grieving stepfather, actually be Sarah's killer? The motive was unclear, but the cracks in Robert's perfect facade were beginning to show. Carter realized he had been so focused on Amanda that he had nearly missed the real story unfolding right before his eyes. The pivotal moment in the investigation came from an unexpected source. Sarah's best friend, Emily Chen, approached Detective Carter with a small leather-bound book, Sarah's personal diary. Emily, racked with guilt, admitted she had initially withheld the diary, fearing it might tarnish Sarah's memory. But as suspicion fell on Amanda, Emily realized the truth was more important than protecting her friend's secrets. Carter spent a sleepless night poring over Sarah's private thoughts. The diary painted a vivid picture of a young woman grappling with a terrible discovery. In entries dating back several months, Sarah wrote of her growing suspicion that her stepfather was having an affair. She described catching glimpses of furtive text messages, overhearing hushed phone calls, and noticing Robert's increasingly erratic behavior. The most damning entry came just 3 days before Sarah's murder. In shaky handwriting, she recounted following Robert one evening and witnessing him in an intimate embrace with Elena Gonzalez. Sarah wrote of her disgust and betrayal, expressing uncertainty about whether to confront Robert or tell her mother. This revelation provided the missing piece of the puzzle. Sarah had discovered Robert's affair, presenting a clear motive for murder. Robert, a man who had built his life on carefully maintaining appearances, faced the threat of losing everything: his marriage, his reputation, and his financial stability. Armed with this new information, Carter revisited the forensic evidence. He ordered a more thorough examination of Sarah's clothing, specifically searching for trace evidence that might have been overlooked. The results were telling. Fibers found on Sarah's jacket matched those from a rare wool blend used in Robert's expensive suits. Furthermore, a re-examination of Sarah's phone records showed a series of calls to Robert's office number on the day of her disappearance. The calls had been brief, suggesting Sarah might have been trying to confront her stepfather or arrange a meeting. Carter also discovered that Robert had purchased a hunting knife from a local sporting goods store just a week before the murder. The knife, conspicuously missing from the Wilson home, matched the type of weapon believed to have been used in the crime. As the pieces fell into place, Carter realized the extent of Robert's deception. He had not only manipulated his family and community, but had also skillfully misdirected the entire investigation towards Amanda. The detective felt a mix of admiration for Robert's cunning and disgust at his cold-blooded actions. With mounting evidence pointing to Robert Wilson as the killer, Carter knew he needed to move quickly. The man who had once been viewed as a pillar of the community was now revealed to be a calculating murderer, willing to sacrifice his stepdaughter to protect his secrets. Detective Carter decided to confront Robert Wilson at his office, away from the prying eyes of neighbors and the media that had been camped outside the Wilson home. As Carter and his partner entered the plush confines of Robert's financial advisory firm, they found him in the middle of a client meeting, the picture of professional composure. In a voice barely above a whisper, Robert began to talk. He spoke of Sarah confronting him in the woods, threatening to expose his affair to Amanda and Elena's husband. He described the panic that overtook him, the fear of losing everything he had worked for. With tears streaming down his face, Robert recounted how he had lashed out in desperation, silencing Sarah permanently. The confession poured out of him, a torrent of guilt and self-loathing. Robert described how he had meticulously planned to frame Amanda, playing on the known tensions between stepmother and stepdaughter. As Carter placed him under arrest, Robert's only words were a broken plea. "Don't tell Elena. Please don't let her know what I've done." The once proud man was led out of his office in handcuffs, his world collapsing around him as the truth of his actions finally came to light. After a 2-week trial and mere hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a guilty verdict on all counts, including first-degree murder. The judge, citing the brutal nature of the crime and Robert's calculated attempts to deceive investigators, sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice had been served. But for those whose lives had been shattered by Robert's actions, the wounds would take far longer to heal. In the end, the case of Robert Wilson stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable loss, the relentless pursuit of justice, and the enduring power of a young woman's voice, even when silenced, to ultimately reveal the truth.